Chapter 461, Emergency Meeting. Hiruzen, the three elders, the seven clan leaders, and Fujin sat in the council room. Since it was an emergency meeting, everyone had arrived on time. Except for Fujin, everyone looked at Hiruzen, waiting for him to start the meeting and state the reason for the emergency meeting. Hiruzen looked around the room, meeting his eyes with everyone in the room. He started the meeting by saying, "I'm sure every one of you is curious about why I called this meeting. This meeting is due to some recent events that Fujin discovered during his mission to the land of hot waters." His tone became serious as he said, "What will be discussed today will be very important for the future of our village. It goes without saying that all the information must stay within these walls. If any information gets leaked, I'm afraid that it will provoke some countries into starting a war." Hiruzen's words made everyone serious. Even Shikaku, who was looking sleepy and yawning until then, became sharp. Meanwhile, Danzo looked at Fujin and thought, this meeting is due to him as well? I still haven't discovered what happened to my two subordinates. And he is already a part of something that involves the future of the village. He looked at Hiruzen and wondered, did Hiruzen give him some secret mission and ask him to eliminate everyone who interfered? But what mission could that be? Danzo was indeed confused. His ninjas had looked along the path Fujin should have taken when he eliminated the bandits. However, they didn't find any clues regarding the two missing root ninjas. So even though Danzo suspected Fujin, he had no evidence to blame him or make Hiruzen investigate him. Seeing that everyone in the room was serious, Hiruzen said, "In Yugikure, a ninja named Haiden went rogue recently. He killed 18 ninjas and several civilians before going rogue. He was also involved in kidnapping more than 300 civilians. Fujin was sent to hunt him down and rescue the kidnapped people. However, he arrived late. All the kidnapped people were killed in a mysterious way, their bodies decomposing several hundred times faster than normal. And the cave they were in was covered in a formation made of seals. Many of those seals and symbols are the ones we have never seen before. They are completely different from our usual seals, and..." He looked around the room before completing his statement. "Even I couldn't identify their functions despite studying them for several hours." The word surprised everyone in the room. Though most in the room weren't good with seals, they all understood what Hiruzen's words implied. At the same time, everyone looked at Fujin as well. Since Fujin was the one who discovered it, that meant that he should be able to identify every seal in Konoha at the very least. It implied that he was close to being a grandmaster in Fuinjutsu, if he wasn't one already. Except for Danzo, Shikaku, and Senju Hiromasa, no one had heard about Fujin even being a seal master, let alone a grandmaster. It made everyone re-evaluate the young man. Danzo asked, "Do you mean that the seals are completely different from any other seals we studied?" Danzo looked into Hiruzen's eyes. Though his question seemed normal, it was different for Hiruzen. Both of them had looked a lot into the Uzumaki seals, be it with Uzumaki Mito's help or scavenging the village after it was destroyed. No one else in Konoha had studied seals as much as either of them. The only one who came close in this aspect was Orochimaru, who was no longer in the village. To his surprise, Hiruzen still nodded and said, "Yes." Danzo's eyes widened. He immediately understood the importance of that matter. Hiruzen placed the scrolls that Fujin handed him the previous day and said, "Fujin recorded these scrolls. If anyone is interested, you can see them." Danzo immediately grabbed one scroll. A few others also looked into the other scrolls with some curiosity. While they did, Hiruzen said, "Due to the mission, Fujin couldn't record the entire formation. I have dispatched a squad to record the entire formation. They should be done in a few days. The cave will be destroyed to prevent the other villages from getting access to this seal." Fujin sighed internally on hearing that. He thought, "I was hoping that the other villages work on this too. That way I'll be able to get a lot more help in studying these seals." That said, it isn't a surprise that Hiruzen chose this. I'd have done the same if I was in his shoes. Oh well, getting help from the grandmasters in Konoha isn't bad either. They'll be able to devote far more time to it than me. After all, researching new seals will take a long time, and there won't be any guarantees of success. Hiruzen continued, The knowledge of these seals and the formation will stay only among us, the grandmasters in our village and Kakashi and the Umbu commander. Once we record the formation, every grandmaster in the village will be allowed to study these seals and figure out what the seals do and what the symbols mean. Once every month or so, I'll organize a meeting for all the grandmasters to share their findings and decide on how to progress further. If anyone has a different opinion, feel free to share now. Hiruzen knew that there could be some obstructions. He only allowed grandmasters to study the seals. Not every clan had a grandmaster in Fuinjutsu. After all, it wasn't easy to reach that stage. Not everyone had the time, interest, patience, or ability to create dozens of shadow clones and sustain them for hours to study the seals. As he expected, some said, "I have just one suggestion. Open up those meetings to us clan leaders to observe so that we may know what the progress is." Hiruzen thought for a few seconds before nodding and said, "All right, that can be arranged. However, any clan leader who isn't a grandmaster will be there only as an observer. Also, the attendance of clan leaders will be optional." Some nodded and said, "That's fine with me." Hiruzen looked around the room. There weren't any other objections or suggestions. Hiruzen said, "Since everyone agrees, the meeting ends here. Once Kakashi's squad returns, I'll make copies of the formation and distribute them among the grandmasters." Once again, nothing discussed here gets out. The meeting has concluded. Everyone nodded and began leaving. Only 3 people didn't leave. They were Hiruzen, Fujin, and Danzo, each of whom continued sitting in their spots. Once everyone left, Danzo said, "Hiruzen, did you make copies of these seals? I want to take these to study." Hiruzen nodded and said, "I did make a copy. However, this one was made by Fujin. I was intending to return it to him so that he can continue studying them." Danzo was confused. He wondered, what is he planning by giving such an answer? Does he want to give these to Fujin and stop me from getting access to them? But what will that accomplish considering that he is planning to distribute the formation to every grandmaster? Unlike Danzo, Fujin didn't miss the obvious helping hand Hiruzen had given him. Danzo looked at Fujin and asked, "Are you planning on studying these, or can I take them?" Fujin put up a thoughtful expression and replied, "I was planning to study them. It is the first time that I've seen seals that aren't recorded in our village." Danzo frowned. He thought, "I don't know what these seals do. I have a feeling that they will be very beneficial for me. I don't want to give Hiruzen any opportunity to play any games." Before Fujin could continue, Danzo replied, "I can study the seals far faster than you. Considering the importance of the seal, I insist that you let me study them for now." Fujin replied with a smile on his face, "That's true. I can wait. Actually, even if you didn't say it, I was planning to let you take it, Elder. But I hope that you can help me resolve an issue I'm facing." Danzo immediately realized. He glanced at Hiruzen and cursed in his mind. So this is why he said those words. He wanted me to owe Fujin one and help him out. He asked, "What is the issue?" Fujin replied, "I was trying to create a vacuum jutsu that covers a wide range, something similar to the Great Breakthrough Jutsu. Unfortunately, I couldn't create a vacuum core stable and large enough to do so." Danzo immediately realized the issue. He couldn't help but think, "I heard that he is extremely good with wind vacuum technique, but is he treating it as just wind manipulation?" "Still, before I answer, I need to know one thing." Danzo said, "Before I help you, I have one thing I wanted to ask you as well. I heard that you had taken a few missions around 3 weeks earlier and moved south. During your journey, did you see any ninjas from the route?" Chapter 462. Forcing Danzo to teach. Danzo's sudden question surprised Hiruzen. He looked at Danzo with suspicion and wondered, was it a coincidence or did he specifically send them after Fujin? Even Fujin was surprised. He didn't expect Danzo to openly ask such a question. Fortunately, he was prepared just in case. He put up a confused expression and replied, "I didn't. In fact, I didn't come across any Konoha ninja during my time down south. Did something happen?" While Fujin answered, Danzo observed him carefully. He analyzed. His chakra flow was calm as he answered. But he is an experienced sensor. It shouldn't be difficult for him to disguise it if he is lying. Danzo replied, "Yes. Two root ninjas left around the same time that you left the village and were headed in the same direction. Both went missing immediately. I never heard back from either of them. Fujin put up a thoughtful expression. Meanwhile, Hiruzen observed both Fujin and Danzo. Unfortunately, neither of their expressions gave any hint of the truth. Hiruzen speculated, knowing Danzo, it is likely that he sent them to keep an eye on Fujin. The chances of it being a coincidence are very low. But what happened to them? Don't tell me Fujin really eliminated both of them. Hiruzen became serious. While he knew that there was some tension between Fujin and Danzo, he didn't want it to develop into an all-out battle. He immediately started feeling a headache. Cutting his thoughts off, Fujin asked, "Did you find out whether they left the village before me or after me? Also, how strong were they?" Fujin's questions confused both of them. Neither Danzo nor Hiruzen could understand the reason behind the questions. Danzo answered, "Both were jounins. They left the village a few minutes after you." Fujin replied, "No wonder I didn't sense them. I was traveling at a very fast speed. A normal jounin wouldn't be able to catch up with me. Besides, I activated my chakra field several times while moving. Had they come close to me, I'd have detected them even if they hid their chakra. That said, I did inspect the route I was traveling along. I didn't detect any ninja hiding along the route. Unless it was a rank S ninja or someone absurdly good at stealth, I'm confident that there was no one hidden along the path. The only possible explanations are that those two took a different route or someone crossed that encountered them long after I had already moved on. Unfortunately, I am afraid that I can't help you in either of the cases. I'll recommend asking ninjas who left the village after them. If there was someone faster among them, maybe they might have seen something." Fujin's reply left Hiruzen and Danzo speechless for a moment. Danzo thought, no jounin can catch up with him? He stated that as if it was a fact without a shred of doubt in his voice. What arrogance! Even Minato wasn't this arrogant despite his power. Even Hiruzen had the same thought. He sighed internally while thinking, now that I think about it, we were arrogant when we were young as well. That said, we never acted arrogant in front of Lord Second. However, even though they were irked by Fujin's arrogance, both understood that he was right. While Hiruzen had barely seen a glimpse of Fujin's battle, and Danzo had only heard about his achievements, the reputation of the spectral swordsman was too high. Despite being inactive for quite some time, the minor villages still feared that name. He was known for appearing out of nowhere, killing his enemies at blinding speed and disappearing before anyone understood what was happening. An ordinary jounin stood no chance against him. Not to mention, since Danzo had no proof, he had to accept whatever Fujin said. He had no points to counter Fujin or interrogate him more. He could only reply, "All right, I'll look into the matter more deeply." Fujin nodded while thinking, "Look as much as you want. Both of them are dead, cremated, and even their ashes are buried deep under the ground somewhere in the land of rivers. Good luck finding them." Fujin quickly changed the topic and asked, "So, can you tell me how to create a stable vacuum core for wide-range vacuum jutsu?" Danzo shook his head and said, "It is impossible to do so. A jutsu like the Great Breakthrough Jutsu works because winds can spread very easily with little to no resistance. To be able to create a vacuum core to support such a jutsu, your vacuum core should be able to expand itself and spread along the jutsu. And the expansion wouldn't just be horizontal, but also vertical. It is impossible to create such a large vacuum core normally, let alone by making a smaller core expand." A frown formed on Fujin's face. He had obviously thought of all the complications Danzo had stated. It was why he had failed to create the jutsu. However, he recalled Danzo using a jutsu to pierce Sasuke's Susanoo. Though the jutsu wasn't as wide-scaled as a Great Breakthrough Jutsu, it still was far better than the vacuum bullet or vacuum cannon. The only thing that Fujin wasn't clear on was how much of a factor Danzo's summon was in that attack. Fujin said, "I've thought of it as well. So, how do we bypass these issues and create one?" Hiruzen chuckled internally at Fujin's response. He thought. He directly ignored all the complications and demanded for the jutsu. He found the situation extremely amusing. For once, he wasn't the target of Fujin's demands. Instead, it was the guy who constantly gave him headaches. Danzo was surprised once again. He couldn't help but glance at Hiruzen. Having known Hiruzen for so long, he could easily recognize the amusement in his eyes. He cursed internally, "Now I understand." I wondered why Hiruzen pushed this boy to the council despite never attempting to do the same for Kakashi, whose background is considerably stronger and would have received a lot more support. Hiruzen didn't get Fujin into the council because he was strong. He did it because this boy is as shameless as him. Danzo had no choice but to answer. Hiruzen's earlier words implied that Danzo was receiving a favor from Fujin. In addition, Fujin also cooperated in providing information regarding the missing root ninjas. Not to mention, passing knowledge to the next generation was a part of the will of fire. Even though Danzo had fallen into the darkness, he still needed to keep up his image. So, even if Fujin didn't do him any favors, he would have still had to tell Fujin about it. After all, Danzo was no longer active on the front lines while Fujin would be active for decades. If he declined, Hiruzen would find another reason to restrict whatever remained of his root even more. Danzo answered, "It's simple. Just reduce your goal. Though it won't be as wide or as strong as you want it to be, the jutsu will still be very strong. Observe this." Danzo stretched his left arm forward. A vacuum core began forming in his hand. Fujin's eyes began glowing as he concentrated chakra in them. So did Hiruzen's eyes. As the core formed, both were surprised. While Danzo had created a vacuum core, it was very different. The vacuum core itself consisted of several vacuum cores. Fujin could see 9 vacuum cores inside it. Danzo explained, "Create a vacuum core that can store multiple vacuum cores inside it. When you use it to attack, you can split the vacuum cores inside and send them in different directions, increasing the area your jutsu can cover. You have 2 choices in this aspect. 1, you can send the vacuum cores very far away from each other. This is helpful when you are facing several ninjas that are considerably weaker than you and close to each other. However, stronger ninjas can easily dodge the vacuum cores and endure the rest of the jutsu. The other way is to have those vacuum cores move close to each other. The distance should be such that no one can slip in between any 2 vacuum cores. This way, the area the jutsu covers is far less than the first way. However, it is still greater than a normal vacuum jutsu. You can compare it to shooting multiple vacuum bullets very close to each other. To dodge them, your enemy would have to move out of the way entirely. However, since those are individual bullets, they aren't as impactful as this. If you do it by storing those vacuum cores in another vacuum core, sharp winds will naturally form between each individual vacuum core once they split up. As a result, they are far more dangerous. In addition, there is a limit to how many vacuum cores for vacuum bullets or other techniques you can form at the same time. By comparison, it is easier to increase the number of cores stored inside this vacuum core. Of course, there are limits as well, but that limit is much higher. Creating over 50 vacuum cores inside it isn't difficult. Then, you can increase the range further without losing its power and threat. Chapter 463, Tunnels in the Training Ground. Fujin properly observed the vacuum core while listening to every word Danzo said. He wasn't worried about Danzo lying. After all, he had the professor sitting with him and listening as well. Not to mention, Fujin's own expertise in the wind vacuum technique wasn't very far from Danzo's. In fact, Fujin was even more efficient than Danzo considering the fact that Danzo hadn't been active for years while Fujin had several run-ins with elite jounins and rank S ninjas. Fujin only fell short in the amount of time they had the jutsus for. Analyzing Danzo's words, he realized, I see. I had nearly got it right. I created multiple vacuum cores and spread them inside the infinite breakthrough jutsu. Unfortunately, those independent cores don't amplify the effect and don't have any interaction between themselves. Instead of creating multiple separate vacuum cores, I have to create multiple vacuum core inside one vacuum core. Fujin finally understood the point he overlooked. Though Danzo's method wasn't as good as the one he wanted, it was still far stronger than what he had come up with. Regardless, it was still a major improvement for Fujin. If he had learnt that jutsu earlier, Kakuzu would have lost far more than just one heart. Fujin looked at the vacuum core in Danzo's palm and analyzed, The vacuum cores inside it are for the vacuum bullet. Once he shoots it, it'll split into 9 different vacuum bullets. Assuming he keeps one at the center and the remaining 8 forms an octagon around it and stay a foot away from it, it'll cover a distance of 1 foot in every direction. Considering the ability of the vacuum cores to absorb nearby items, the target would have to move slightly more than a foot in any direction. That said, vacuum bullet isn't the ideal jutsu for this. Vacuum waves jutsu will be ideal for this, as it covers a larger area than a vacuum bullet. Once I increase the number of cores I can store inside it beyond 30, it'll cover more area than a great fireball. Not too extravagant, but still far better than my current attacks. Danzo extinguished the vacuum core in his palm, snapping Fujin out of his thoughts. He asked, "Anything else?" Fujin shook his head and said with a smile on his face, "No. Thank you for your guidance." Though Fujin had long planned out Danzo's death and still intended to follow it unless Danzo forced him to kill him earlier, he saw no issue in accepting Danzo's help. In fact, if Danzo offered more help, Fujin was willing to accept all help with a smile on his face. After all, how could he get anything from Danzo after Danzo died? Of course, Fujin understood that this was a one-off event. Danzo only helped Fujin because he wanted those scrolls and because Hiruzen was there. Danzo nodded and grabbed the scrolls on the table before leaving. Fujin took a look at the scrolls and thought, though Hiruzen applied some pressure, the main point was those seals. I hope that it is just his instincts and not some clue he found. With Izanagi, though he is annoying, killing him isn't difficult. However, if he gains something like Haiden's immortality, he could be a pain in the ass to deal with. After Danzo left, Hiruzen smiled and said, "Didn't I tell you? All elders will support the youngsters in our village, especially if the youngsters are as promising as you. Though I'm normally busy, you can approach the other elders whenever you want." Fujin looked at Hiruzen. He understood that Hiruzen wanted him to trouble Hamura and Koharu as well. Unfortunately, there wasn't anything Fujin could think of to ask them for. Instead, Hiruzen's mischievous speech caused him to have an irresistible temptation to ask for the Edo Tensei Jutsu. Fortunately for Hiruzen, Fujin was able to resist the temptation. There wasn't any good argument Fujin could make to demand a forbidden and controversial jutsu like the Edo Tensei. He smiled and said, "You are right. I'll approach them when I need something." He got up and said, "I'll leave now, Grandpa. I want to try out this jutsu." Hiruzen nodded. Fujin disappeared from the council room. A smile formed on Hiruzen's face as he recalled the interaction between Fujin and Danzo. He muttered to himself, it was worth it. Perhaps agreeing to Danzo's request of inducting Fujin into the route 4 years ago wouldn't have been an entirely bad thing. If it wasn't for those seals, it might have been better to agree. Hiruzen disappeared from the meeting room as well. For the rest of the day, his mood was quite good. Fujin didn't waste any time and began practicing. Though the concept of creating multiple vacuum cores inside another vacuum core was a new one, it wasn't very difficult for Fujin. Within a few hours, he managed to create one vacuum core inside another. 2 days later, he managed to replicate the vacuum core that Danzo had created. The next day, Naruto entered the training ground early in the morning. He stretched himself and exclaimed loudly, "Today I'll cut the leaf in half, believe it." He went to grab a leaf but suddenly stopped and said, "Huh? What's this?" Naruto saw that a part of the trunk of the tree in front of him was missing. It was as if someone had carved out a part of the trunk. He looked beyond the tree and his eyes widened. Every tree that was in line had a large chunk carved out. In addition, some trees had split into 2, and those 2 parts didn't fit together. It was as if some part in between was missing. Naruto curiously followed the trail of destruction before he reached a small hill. His eyes widened in shock as he shouted, "What the hell happened here? How did such a deep hole appear inside the hill? Was someone trying to dig a tunnel?" The curiosity caused Naruto to forget about training. He began looking around the training ground and found similar scenes all over the training ground. While he was looking around, Fujin entered the training ground and sensed Naruto moving around everywhere. He thought, what is this knucklehead up to? He flickered behind Naruto, who was looking at a hill which in fact had a tunnel going through it. Naruto felt something behind him and looked back. He excitedly said, "Fujin, you are back. Check this out." Someone was digging tunnels in the training ground while you were gone. Fujin was amused by Naruto's excitement and curiosity. He thought, I wonder how he would have reacted if he had visited this training ground when I was training vacuum Gatling. When Fujin trained vacuum Gatling and other vacuum jutsus, the entire training ground was covered in holes and debris at one point. Even the density of trees in the training ground had decreased considerably during that time. Their numbers still hadn't recovered, and if Fujin continued training there, they were unlikely to recover any time in the future. Fujin said, Ignore them. How's your training going? Naruto grinned and said, I have mastered the wind levitation jutsu. Watch this. Naruto weaved a few hand seals and shouted, Wind release. Wind levitation jutsu. Naruto was looking at a few twigs that were in front of him. In a second, winds began flowing around the twigs. Soon, they were lifted into the air due to the airflow and floated a couple of feet above the ground. Around 5 seconds later, Naruto couldn't maintain the jutsu, and the twigs fell back to the ground. Naruto said excitedly, See, I told you that I will master it. Believe it. Fujin nodded and said, Good progress. However, the time you can maintain the jutsu is too little. Try to maintain it for at least 30 seconds. Only then it can barely be considered as mastered. Naruto nodded. Fujin asked, What is your progress with leaf concentration and leaf cutting exercises? Naruto said, I can stick the leaf to my forehead for 90 minutes. The leaf cutting exercise I'm almost done with. Naruto picked up a leaf and placed it on his left palm. He placed his right palm on top of it and began releasing wind chakra. It slowly cut through the leaf and almost split the leaf into 2 halves. Only around half a centimeter was left. Fujin observed it and thought, Not bad. His progress in these 2 exercises has surprisingly been quite fast. Looks like he didn't slack off. He should be able to cut through the leaf in a week. Leaf concentration might take another month, though. Still, that's fine. There will be enough time to teach him tree climbing and water walking before he graduates. Naruto asked, Will you teach me the 4th jutsu? Fujin replied, For now, focus on leaf cutting. When you can cut through it and maintain wind levitation for 15 seconds, I'll teach it to you. He smiled and said, Keep working hard, Naruto. You have progressed a lot since I met you. Hearing Fujin's praise, Naruto felt proud. He smiled and nodded his head while saying, I will believe it. Fujin said, You can train at your home for the next couple of weeks. This training ground is going to be a bit busy. Naruto was confused and wondered, Is it because of these tunnels? He nodded and left. Fujin saw him leave. Naruto's progress was very much in line with what Fujin had expected. However, for the time being, he didn't spend much time thinking about him. Instead, his focus was on his vacuum jutsus. He thought, I have successfully learned how to store multiple vacuum bullet cores inside a vacuum core. Today, I'll master how to store vacuum wave cores. Chapter 464, AoE Vacuum Jutsu. Fujin muttered to himself, This might take some time. With vacuum bullets, I could refer to and replicate Danzo's vacuum core. However, I will have to create an entirely new core this time to accommodate the cores of vacuum wave. After all, the shapes of the cores of the 2 jutsus are very different from each other. Still, it shouldn't take too long. Fujin extended his palm ahead. A large spherical vacuum core formed on top of his hand. Soon, a vacuum core began forming inside the larger core. Unlike the vacuum bullet core, which was shaped like a bullet, this one was shaped like a thread. It was a lot longer but very thin and curved in shape. Since Fujin could already store 9 vacuum bullet cores inside the larger core, it wasn't a challenge for him to create 1 vacuum wave core inside it. Suddenly, Fujin noticed something. He analyzed, Wait a minute. Unlike the vacuum bullet core, where I need to maintain the spherical shape and have to create proper spaces inside the larger vacuum core to hold them, the vacuum wave core has a huge advantage. Since their shape is elongated and doesn't need to be straight, I can just curve or, better yet, coil them inside the larger core while creating a small chakra film to keep them separated from each other. In that case, I'll be able to increase the number of vacuum wave cores inside it very easily. As I thought, vacuum wave is indeed the jutsu most suited for this technique. Fujin's expression lit up upon realizing it. He quickly began creating more vacuum wave cores inside the larger core. As he expected, he faced very little trouble in creating it. He quickly managed to create 7 cores inside it. The vacuum wave cores were just too compatible with this technique. Fujin dispelled the vacuum core and thought, wow, 7 on my first try. I needed a couple of days to reach 9 with vacuum bullet cores. Still, that bastard Danzo, he knew that vacuum wave would have been the most compatible jutsu with this, yet he only showed me vacuum bullets. I guess he was very reluctant to inform me about this technique. Well, whatever. It shouldn't be hard to apply this technique to my remaining vacuum jutsus. Fujin began practicing again. On every try, the amount of vacuum cores he could store inside the larger vacuum core increased. An hour later, the number reached 76. Fujin stared at the vacuum core in his hand and thought, this should be my limit for now. Though increasing it further shouldn't be much harder. I just need more practice. Anyway, it's time to test it. Fujin dispelled the vacuum core, and a shadow clone appeared next to him. The clone stood around 25 meters in front of Fujin and slammed his palm on the ground. A large wall appeared in front of him. He moved backwards slightly while continuing to slam his palm on the ground. In all, 4 large walls stood between the two. Each wall was about 0.5 meters thick. Fujin took a deep breath and began forming the vacuum core in his mouth. Soon, 76 vacuum wave cores formed inside that vacuum core, and the large vacuum core was surrounded by wind chakra. Wind release. Vacuum serial waves, jutsu, Fujin shot out the jutsu. Immediately, the larger vacuum core collapsed, and the 76 vacuum cores inside it were released. It was equivalent to Fujin using the vacuum wave jutsu 76 times. The jutsu hit the first wall. Several vacuum waves hit the wall and pierced through it. Around a 10-meter-wide section of the wall collapsed. The remaining vacuum waves followed through the collapsing part of the wall, cutting through any stones that were in their way. The jutsu continued moving through all 4 walls in the same fashion. The clone saw the jutsu coming at him, bit his thumb, and slammed his bloody palm on the ground. Summoning jutsu. Rashomon, a large metal gate having a demonic face on the gates, appeared in front of the clone. A moment later, the gate was hit by Fujin's jutsu. Unlike the Earthwall jutsu, the Rashomon could endure the vacuum jutsus. In the past, Fujin's vacuum jutsus had failed to create much of an impact on the Rashomon. Only the vacuum cannon jutsu had created a large dent into the Rashomon gate, but even it couldn't pierce through it. However, this time, Fujin watched with hopeful eyes. The vacuum waves slammed into the Rashomon gate, each creating a small dent and damaging its structural integrity. Cracks soon developed on the gate. When the 59th vacuum wave slammed into it, the Rashomon gate collapsed before disappearing. The jutsu hit the clone hiding behind it and dispelled him. Without any obstacle, the vacuum serial waves jutsu continued moving for another 80 meters, destroying any tree and cutting deep into any small hill in its path. A wry smile appeared on Fujin's face as he muttered, I overdid it. The training ground was a wreck. If the tunnels formed due to the vacuum bullet jutsu intrigued Naruto and awoke his curiosity, the sight in front of Fujin would horrify him. First, there was the debris due to the broken walls. That was followed by every tree in the path of the jutsu being cut down for 80 meters. In addition, a couple of small hills had deep cuts in them while one had collapsed. Fujin thought, I damaged the training ground a bit too much. Fortunately, there aren't any penalties for doing so. I'll just ask Hiruzen to do something about it. Anyway, the good news is that I finally have an AoE vacuum jutsu. At a range of around 20 to 25 meters, I can spread this jutsu 10 meters wide and 5 meters high to have the optimal effect. Once I increase the cores inside it even further, the area it covers can be increased more, or alternatively, I can make it stronger by focusing on a limited area. Fujin chuckled while thinking, I never would have imagined that Danzo would have been the one to help me take my vacuum jutsus to the next level. I can replace my older vacuum serial waves jutsu with this one. This one is far more efficient and powerful in every way. As for the vacuum bullet jutsu, I should replace it as well. By keeping several vacuum cores within one, I'll be able to create more vacuum bullets at a time. Not to mention, sharp winds flow between the vacuum bullets, making dodging far more difficult. The only time I'll need to use my normal vacuum bullets is when my enemies are very far from each other or to conserve my chakra if the enemy is too good at dodging. With this method, even though I can spread the vacuum bullets, they still have to be in a similar direction. Unless I can create two large cores with multiple cores within them. I'll try this out later once I'm comfortable with this technique. That said, there is one drawback. The time needed in this method is higher. But that shouldn't be an issue after using this method for a few months. Not to mention, needing more time to create more cores is a natural thing. There isn't much I can do about it if I have to create several dozen cores. Due to this drawback, using this technique on vacuum Gatling isn't very practical. After all, the essence of that technique is speed and surprise. Though there is no harm in learning it in case I need it for some reason. It could be a good way to learn how to create multiple such cores. As for vacuum cannon, this method would be good only when I have a defense to pierce. I can line up the vacuum cannons behind one another and have them hit the same spot. I wonder if Susanoo would be able to resist such an assault. Anyway, in all other cases, the normal vacuum cannon will be better. As for vacuum blade and vacuum slash, this method isn't very compatible with them. Is there any way I can use them? Fujin thought for a few minutes and concluded, using this method with vacuum slash is pointless. I need to form it in the time I swing my sword. I can't waste time creating multiple vacuum cores. However, vacuum blades can have a possible use. If I can store vacuum blade cores in this vacuum core and activate it after I have thrown the jutsu, then it has the potential to catch enemies by surprise. The enemy might see it as a normal vacuum bullet or vacuum sphere and dodge it, only to be attacked by several vacuum blades. This has some potential. If I manage to store it in a seal, then it can act as a deadly trap. Alright, I'll learn this as well. Chapter 465. Hiruzen's Disbelief. Fujin analyzed his plans for a while before nodding. He thought, alright, these plans should be good. It'll make my attack patterns extremely unpredictable and increase the difficulty of dodging. At the very least, there is no way a group of well-trained Jounins will be able to counter me as IWA did. In fact, once I master them, even a rank S ninja will have to be very careful against me. It'll no longer be as easy as dodging my vacuum jutsus and putting up a defense for the rest. Fujin's eyes moved towards the spot where his clone had dispelled and thought, there is just one other thing. Rashomon isn't good enough for me. I need the triple and the 5-layer Rashomon. Unfortunately, they aren't available in the library. That said, creating them shouldn't be very difficult, but it'll require some time for me to create those variations. Fujin thought for a bit before deciding, unfortunately, I've been feeling that I have very little time as of late. Screw it, I'll just ask Hiruzen. Once my chakra recovers, I'll tell him to send a shadow clone and also take the opportunity to find a better training place. If I keep practicing my vacuum jutsus here, the scenery in front of my house will be completely destroyed. Increasing the number of vacuum cores also increased the amount of chakra required in the same ratio. As a result, Fujin's chakra reserves had become quite low. He decided to do physical training until his chakra recovered. While Fujin got busy with his training, one place became quite chaotic and heated up. What did you say? A loud shout was heard in the Raikage office. Darui, C, and Samui stood in front of the fourth Raikage. There was no one else in the room, and all privacy seals were activated. Otherwise, everyone in the building would have heard that shout. Even then, the ones near the office felt some tremors. I looked at his 3 subordinates and asked, I sent you 3 to find and kill Suzuki Fujin. You didn't even meet him, and yet 10 of the 16 ninjas died? What the hell were you 3 doing? I was mad. When Kumo ninjas met Fujin for the first time, he managed to kill more than a dozen ninjas and escaped despite facing Darui. His escape resulted in Konoha getting crucial information, which resulted in Jiraiya wiping out more than 250 Kumo ninjas, while Hiruzen's political maneuvers eliminated every possibility of Kumobikure getting revenge without having to face extremely serious consequences. Since he couldn't attack Hiruzen or Jiraiya, he set his eyes on Fujin. However, Fujin stayed holed up inside Konoha and later in the Umbu for years, leaving no traces of himself. While it annoyed Ai and strategic planners in Kumo, their annoyance reduced with the passage of time, and eventually no one thought of him anymore. That was until Inoki informed him that Fujin was the spectral swordsman, and he had become extremely ferocious. Since that day, Kumo once again began looking for an opportunity to eliminate Fujin. To their dismay, Fujin stopped taking missions and stayed hidden inside Konoha once again. In the 7 months since then, Fujin left the village just once, and that too under a disguise. So Kumo failed to track his movement until a few days ago, when Fujin left with a new squad to Yugikure. They responded quickly, dispatching a seal master and several jounins and elite jounins under Darui. For the first time in 3.5 years, they had a trail. As a result, when Darui and his team returned with more than half their members dead without even seeing Fujin, I couldn't control his rage. His desk was completely pulverized. Fortunately, Darui, C, and Samui were used to his antics. Darui sighed and answered, "Nothing we could do, boss. The circumstances were out of our control. The other 2 squads you sent ran into a formidable opponent and were eliminated. Without the Seal Master, chasing after Suzuki Fujin was pointless. We could have fallen prey to his seals." I frowned and asked, "Who was it?" To be able to eliminate 2 entire squads, did they run into a rank S ninja? Darui nodded and informed him about Haiden. He carefully explained Haiden's skills to him. I's expression became serious upon learning about Haiden's skills. It was too unbelievable to believe. Darui added, "Since we couldn't hunt Suzuki Fujin, we decided to take down and capture this guy. If we can torture him and force him to tell us how to learn that technique, our village's strength will increase drastically." I agreed with the analysis. He thought, "While I don't need that technique as no one can pierce through my defenses, if a few elite jounins manage to learn it, they could easily be classified as rank S ninjas. Even jounins with these skills would be superior to normal rank S ninjas in terms of survival. I could easily see the unimaginable advantages Kumo would gain." Darui continued, "Unfortunately, he was too good at escaping. We tried finding him in the Land of Frost but couldn't find him. During the chase, we met up with 2 Akatsuki members. Uchiha Itachi has joined Akatsuki. There was another blue-haired Kunoichi, but we couldn't identify her. She isn't in the bingo book, but is most likely a rank S ninja too. We later found traces of a huge fight that happened very close to where we met them." I furrowed his eyebrows. While he knew about the existence of Akatsuki and the presence of some strong ninjas in it, learning that Itachi and an unknown rank S ninja were a part of them caused him to feel a headache. Darui continued, "We aren't sure what their aim was, but I suspect that they were after Haiden as well. We continued looking for Haiden after that, but completely lost his trail. However, I suspect that he is still hiding in the Land of Frost or the Land of Hot Water." Samui said, "There is another piece of intel we received. Apparently, Haiden had kidnapped 300 civilians inside the Land of Hot Water. Suzuki Fujin's mission was to find them. He managed to find them, but could only recover their corpses. Our spy reported that the cave where the corpses were was covered in seals, which is why Yugikure ninjas couldn't find them. In addition, every corpse had decayed at an extreme speed. Suzuki Fujin chased after Haiden in the Land of Frost as well, but we aren't sure what happened to him after that. However, the cave where the corpses were found was destroyed yesterday. Someone eliminated the 6 Yugikure ninjas stationed there and destroyed the cave. There is no information on who did that. The additional information troubled I even more. He thought, so many events. I have a feeling that there is something important happening here. But what is it? Unfortunately, I had very little information. He said, "We have a lot of ninjas who don't have any missions. I'll deploy them in the Land of Frost and the Land of Hot Water. Lead them and try to find Haiden. Give proper instructions to ensure that they don't fall prey to his technique. I don't want to lose more ninjas meaninglessly. As for Suzuki Fujin, ignore him for now. I'll send a Grandmaster with you to inspect that cave. I have a feeling that it will have the clues we need." Darui and the other 2 nodded. They had the same thoughts as well. Within a few hours, several hundred Kumo ninjas were dispatched. Every single one was instructed to not engage Haydn in a fight. Their only job was to inform the elite Jounins they were under about Haydn's location once they found him. Every ninja was given hundreds of explosion tags to help escape if Haydn chased after them. Once an elite Jounin found Haydn, he would trail him without engaging in a battle while waiting for Darui's team to reinforce him. Needless to say, the entire mission was pointless. Haydn had already joined Akatsuki and was moving towards the Land of Rain. As for the cave, the Grandmasters Hiruzen deployed had eliminated most seals inside them before the cave was destroyed. The only seals that still remained were the ones that were very well known throughout the ninja world. So, there was nothing that they could gain. While Kumobikure was carrying out a meaningless operation, Hiruzen was staring in disbelief at the person in front of him. For the second time, Fujin had sent a shadow clone and asked Hiruzen to send a shadow clone to help him out. In fact, this time Fujin didn't even bother requesting or asking it. Chapter 466, Pitiful Hiruzen. A few moments earlier, Fujin's clone entered Hiruzen's office. Hiruzen looked at him and asked with a smile, "Welcome, Fujin. Is anything the matter?" Fujin clone nodded and answered with a smile, "Yes, Grandpa, but it is nothing too serious to disturb you a lot. I am facing a couple of issues. Just send a shadow clone to help me out." For a moment, Hiruzen was completely speechless. In fact, he even struggled to form proper thoughts. He was even wondering whether he heard the right thing. The speechlessness could be seen on his face. Needless to say, Fujin enjoyed the disbelief on Hiruzen's face, but didn't react to it, and acted as if everything he didn't notice it. Hiruzen finally gathered his thoughts and cursed, "This brat." Last time, he was at least respectful about it. This time he didn't even ask or request it. He just said it as if it is the most natural thing to do, and I have no reason to say no. Though Fujin's tone wasn't disrespectful, nor his words extremely demanding, it wasn't servile either, and it didn't sound like he was making a request. It was as if an old friend came up to you and asked you to tag along with him to do something. The old friend wouldn't request it due to your long relationship, while you two would go along with it because of your relationship and the fact that the request wasn't anything ridiculous. The only issue was that it wasn't the relationship Fujin and Hiruzen shared. One was the leader of the village and had been sitting in that position for decades, while the other person was just a youngster who received guidance from time to time. The two were multiple generations apart. And though Fujin called Hiruzen Grandpa, Hiruzen was aware that Fujin just took complete advantage of the fact that Hiruzen loved to act as a grandfather-like figure for promising kids, while Fujin was aware that Hiruzen was aware of that fact. Hiruzen was once again put in a tough spot. The last time Fujin approached him, he set a precedent. So if Fujin had sent a clone and requested him like before, he would have agreed. Unfortunately for Hiruzen, Fujin decided to push the bar a bit, putting Hiruzen in an awkward situation once again. Hiruzen's mind calculated rapidly, but there was only one solution. He sighed in his mind and thought, if it was someone else, I'd have thrown them out. But I have invested too much in this boy. I can't damage our relationship by declining him when he isn't asking for much despite his method being too straightforward. He looked at Fujin and thought in grief, why isn't this boy as respectful as Kakashi? Even though Kakashi reads that lewd book openly and shows up late, he is at least respectful towards me and never asks me for anything. Sigh. I wonder which demon possessed me when I asked him to call me Grandpa. I need to be more careful in the future. Hiruzen hadn't responded for over half a minute. Fujin looked at him with a confused expression and asked, "Grandpa?" That snapped Hiruzen out of his thoughts. He said, "Sure, I'll send one." He was about to make a shadow clone when Fujin said, "All right, don't create the clone with too little chakra. I'll need him to have some to help me." Hiruzen was left speechless once again. Unfortunately, he could only swallow his complaints and create a shadow clone with 30% of his chakra. Both the clones left the office and flickered towards the 23rd training ground. Meanwhile, Hiruzen complained in his heart, "I told him to trouble Hamura and Koharu. Why does he still keep giving me trouble?" Unfortunately for Hiruzen, though Fujin agreed, he had very little relationship with the two of them. Not to mention, he was unsure whether they knew the jutsu or not. So, even though Fujin wasn't a fan of those two, he could only request Hiruzen for help. Besides, considering how much work he put in to create a good relationship with Hiruzen, he would be stupid to not take advantage of it when he should. Hiruzen's clone arrived at the training ground and was speechless once again. He couldn't help but mutter, "Did the sky collapse? What the hell happened here?" Fujin's clone replied, "I underestimated the power and range of my new jutsu, Grandpa. It was one of the reasons I called you here. I wanted to know if you have a better place to train wind vacuum jutsus. If I keep practicing here, I'm afraid that this training ground won't last for a long time." Hiruzen's clone glanced at Fujin's clone and thought, he has already mastered a wide-range vacuum jutsu? It has barely been more than 2 days since Danzo showed him the technique. Hiruzen's clone was surprised. The wind vacuum technique was extremely complicated and risky. While it was kept secret, promising ninjas would have an affinity to wind manipulation were given an opportunity to learn it. However, even then, there were only 3 ninjas in the village who could use it. Even someone like Asuma failed to learn it when Hiruzen tried teaching him, while Sunagakure didn't have even a single ninja who could master it. Not to mention, the wind vacuum technique got increasingly complicated as one tried increasing its power. To see Fujin learn the advanced technique Danzo displayed so quickly was outside his expectations. Even Hiruzen would struggle to replicate such a speed. It once again showed how ridiculously good Fujin's affinity to wind manipulation had become. Fujin's clone dispelled himself as Hiruzen's clone appeared next to Fujin. Fujin received all the memories from the clone, smiled at Hiruzen's clone, and asked, "Well, Grandpa, does the village have a better spot to train this jutsu?" Hiruzen's clone shook his head and replied, "There isn't. I doubt there would be any facility that can endure continuous assault from vacuum jutsus. The only way is if you aim it at the skies. However, I'm afraid that it might cause some panic among civilians if bloody birds start dropping from the sky." Fujin nodded. He would have no control over where the bodies of the birds would be flung due to the winds. It was likely that the unlucky birds would be killed and pieces of their bodies would scatter all around Konoha. Hiruzen's clone said, "Ask your shadow clones to create a barrier to stop the damage. You can use the 4 violet flames formation, but you don't need to create the 4 walls or the ceiling and floor. Just create 1 wall and shoot the jutsu in that direction." Fujin complained, "But that would consume too much chakra." Hiruzen's clone shrugged and said, "The only other way would be for you to travel to the south and practice it on seas. However, training while away from the village isn't a good idea. IWA or Kimo might make a move if they receive news of you training in the middle of nowhere. The Akatsuki organization might come after your bounty as well. If they find you when your chakra is low, you'll be in trouble." Fujin nodded. Despite being as strong as he was, training outside the village was too risky. At his full strength, there weren't many foes that Fujin was afraid of. However, it was a different story once his chakra dropped too much. Fujin let out a sigh and asked, "Is it fine if I change the terrain of this training ground?" Hiruzen's clone understood what Fujin was implying. He nodded and said, "Sure. Just keep it limited to the training ground and maintain the trees on the edges of the training ground. Also, don't build something so big that it'll affect the surroundings on being destroyed." Fujin replied, "All right. I'll make a suitable one for this training then." He thought this might be a good opportunity to practice earth jutsus again. I've been wanting to upgrade them and fire jutsus for some time. I should ask Hiruzen for suitable jutsus for them as well. Actually, fire and earth elements aren't the mainstay of my strength. Even if I strengthen them, they will be far inferior to wind and lightning. So it'll be better if I directly ask him for a ready-made combat system for those elements. I won't need to waste any time creating them. Anyway, that can wait for the time being." Hiruzen's clone asked, "What was the second thing you wanted?" Fujin replied, "I wanted a stronger defensive jutsu. Unfortunately, the library didn't have triple Rashomon or the quintuple Rashomon jutsus. Can you teach them to me?" Hiruzen's clone stared at Fujin. He thought, as I guessed, he wants me to teach him a jutsu that he can't find in the library. Don't tell me he'll keep finding me whenever he needs new jutsus. He wasn't sure, but his speculation was exactly on point. Fujin was lucky enough to find an expert old ninja who was so good that everyone called him the Professor. In addition, He was very kind-hearted and magnanimous and always showed how much he favored the younger generation. There was no way Fujin wouldn't deny such a kind-hearted soul the opportunity to pass down his knowledge to a promising youngster. Fortunately, Hiruzen was unaware of Fujin's thoughts. If Hiruzen knew what Fujin's thoughts were, who knew what expression he would show? Chapter 467, New Jutsus 1. Summoning Jutsu. Quintuple Rashomon, Fujin weaved the snake seal, bit his thumb, and slammed his hands on the ground. In an instant, 5 Rashomon gates appeared one after another in a straight line in front of Fujin. Standing next to him, Hiruzen's clone nodded. He said, "That's good. You can use the jutsu perfectly." Fujin's eyes were focused on the gates. The triple and quintuple variants of Rashomon weren't difficult to learn as Fujin already knew the Rashomon jutsu. Even without Hiruzen's help, Fujin would have figured them out in a couple of weeks. However, thanks to Hiruzen's clone, Fujin was able to learn and master both the jutsus in merely half an hour. Since it was just basic summoning, there wasn't much for Fujin to improve upon the jutsu once he could summon them in an instant. Fujin turned his gaze away from the gates and looked at Hiruzen's clone. With a smile on his face, he said, "Thank you, Grandpa." The clone nodded and said, "I forgot to mention this earlier, but Kakashi's squad returned earlier today after recording the entire formation. We're making copies currently. Since you were the one who discovered it, you can get the first copy." Fujin thought for a few seconds and said, "I'll be busy with training in ninjutsu and taijutsu. Though I want to study it, I won't be able to focus on it anytime soon. So, it is fine if you give it to me last. You can give it to the grandmasters who have the time and are interested in studying it." Fujin already had recorded the entire formation even before Hiruzen had learned about it. It made no difference to him whether Hiruzen gave it to him first, last, or never gave it to him at all. As a result, he wasn't concerned about it and took the chance to earn some brownie points. Hiruzen's clone felt better. He thought, though he is very greedy when it comes to jutsus and money, he knows when to step back and let the village benefit. Though it doesn't seem very significant, it shows that his nature is good. The clone nodded and said, "All right. I'll focus on the ones who have time to study it right now. Is there anything else you want to know?" Fujin shook his head and replied, "No, Grandpa. If I need anything, I'll come visit you." The clone's eyes twitched. The good feeling he had evaporated in an instant. Fujin's words were extremely casual. It was as if he saw Hiruzen helping him to be a completely natural thing. In the decades he had served as the Hokage of Konoha, this was the first time Hiruzen was experiencing something like this. He muttered to himself, "I made a mistake last time. I shouldn't have agreed." But Hiruzen knew that even last time, he had no way of declining Fujin's request. After all, Fujin was merely asking for a clone to help him out. Though the request was quite brazen, it didn't require much effort on Hiruzen's part. So, Hiruzen didn't have the option of declining. If he did, he knew that Fujin would be forced to re-evaluate Hiruzen or think that there was an issue in their relationship. After all, which Hokage would decline to help a promising young ninja who would be a pillar of the village in the future unless they have an issue with that ninja? With no other option, the clone could only smile and say, "All right. Feel free to come whenever you want." Hiruzen's clone dispelled himself. A smirk appeared on Fujin's face. He thought, well, that was fun. He turned his attention to the training ground and thought, now, time to modify this training ground. Though I haven't learned that jutsu yet. Oh well, it shouldn't take much time. Fujin created a shadow clone and sent it to the library. A couple of days later, Fujin was in the training ground. He was at the part of the training ground which was on the opposite side of his house. He weaved hand signs while supercharging the jutsu. After half a minute, he slammed his hands on the ground. Earth release. Rampart of flowing soil, a gigantic rampart began rising up from under Fujin's feet. It continued rising until it was 50 meters in height. Its width was around 200 meters. Fujin flickered and appeared in front of the rampart and used the same jutsu. Another rampart rose around 50 meters in front of the first rampart. Fujin repeated the jutsu twice more, sealing off a 50 by 50 land between 4 ramparts. Creating 4 gigantic ramparts caused Fujin's breathing to become a bit rougher. It consumed quite a bit of his chakra. Fortunately, he didn't need to keep creating them on a daily basis. He stood atop one of them and thought, all right, this should be good enough. He gathered chakra and began creating a vacuum core. Wind release. Vacuum serial waves jutsu. Without holding back, he shot the strongest vacuum serial waves jutsu he created towards the ground. The jutsu hit the ground, the vacuum waves piercing deep into the ground for several meters, making the entire surface uneven. A large amount of dust and soil were launched towards the skies due to the impact and the strong winds. However, Fujins released his chakra into the air, transforming it into wind. It quickly began transforming into his wind domain. Within a few seconds, the entire airspace between the 4 ramparts was covered under Fujin's wind domain. The winds in the domain prevented the soil and dust from being launched into the sky and attracting unwanted attention. Within a few seconds, the soil fell back to the ground. A smile appeared on Fujin's face. This was the perfect place to not only train the wide-range vacuum jutsus, but also to improve his control over the wind domain. For the next week, Fujin continued training here daily until he ran out of chakra. He even consumed a special soldier pill to allow him to train more. The ground couldn't sustain such a bombardment and had collapsed more than once. Fortunately, there wasn't anywhere it could escape or fall. Fujin had to use earth jutsus to stabilize the ground and make it firm once again. A couple of the ramparts collapsed as well at some point during the week, but were rebuilt by Fujin. In a week's time, Fujin had more or less mastered the jutsus. Standing on top of one of the ramparts, Fujin thought, this much should be sufficient. Though I can improve it further, it'll take some time as I'll need a lot more practice. Anyway, though the jutsus are quite similar, they are still quite different from their previous versions. Calling them advanced variants will not necessarily be true, but I should name the new jutsus in order to differentiate them. Fortunately, I have thought of a few good ones. Fujin gathered chakra and began forming a vacuum core in his mouth. The vacuum core contained 144 smaller vacuum cores inside it. Wind release. Vacuum serial waves jutsu, Fujin unleashed a massive attack towards the ground. The jutsu bombarded the ground, causing a mini earthquake between the 4 ramparts. In some places, the jutsu pierced more than a couple of dozen meters into the ground. The entire ground, which was fixed by Fujin not long ago, was covered in scars once again. He thought, I don't need to rename this jutsu. After all, I have no reason to use the previous variant of this jutsu. Anyways, in terms of area covered, this is my best vacuum jutsu. I managed to increase the number of cores to 144. And I can even control how much this jutsu should spread, allowing me to switch between hitting a larger area or concentrating on a smaller area to overwhelm defenses. Fujin gathered chakra once again and began making vacuum cores. This time, he created 36 vacuum cores. Wind release. Vacuum cluster bullets jutsu, Fujin shot the larger vacuum core, which contained 36 vacuum bullets in it. The bullets exited the larger vacuum core and moved towards the ground. Some bullets traveled next to each other, and the others were behind or in front of other bullets, maintaining a distance of 1 foot from each other. In addition, extremely sharp winds flew between the bullets. It caused the attack to look like a beam. The beam hit the ground and drilled into it with little resistance. It created an 80-meter deep hole in the ground. Not to mention, the hole was quite wide as well due to the high number of vacuum bullets and the sharp winds flowing in between them. Fujin thought, I'll call this jutsu the vacuum cluster bullets jutsu. This jutsu is most destructive when traveling as a beam. That said, against a nimble opponent, I'll be better off spreading the bullets slightly farther from each other. Though it won't be that destructive in that case, there aren't many ninjas who can defend a normal vacuum bullet. So it shouldn't matter. Chapter 468, New Jutsus 2. For the 3rd time, Fujin gathered chakra and created a large vacuum core in his mouth. This time, there were only 9 smaller cores inside the larger core. However, each of these 9 cores was double the size of the vacuum bullet cores. Wind release. Vacuum cannon barrage, Fujin shot out the jutsu. It split into 9 vacuum cannons, traveling in a straight line. Each vacuum cannon drilled 20 meters into the ground, before being slowed down enough for the vacuum cannon behind it to catch up and continue the destruction. In less than a second, a 187-meter-deep hole formed in the ground. A smile formed on Fujin's face. He thought, in terms of penetrative power, this is indeed my strongest jutsu. Unfortunately, it isn't very practical in combat. No top-level ninja will be stupid enough to stay in the path of this jutsu. It'll only work on someone who is extremely overconfident in his defense and dodge as soon as I shoot the jutsu. Another usage of this jutsu will be killing those who stay hidden deep underground to be safe from my vacuum jutsus. Though it is possible to travel deeper than 200 meters underground, it is not something that is commonly done and not something most ninjas would have tried before. Going more than 25 meters underground itself is extremely rare. As long as I kill everyone who tries to hide underground from my attacks, and don't let the knowledge spread, this will be a sure-shot method to kill my enemies who think that underground is safe. Fujin extended his hands and fingers towards the ground. A vacuum core began forming in front of each of his fingers. 15 smaller vacuum cores were created inside each of the 10 bigger vacuum cores. The cores were soon covered with wind chakra. Wind release. Vacuum infinite Gatling jutsu. Unlike the previous 3 jutsus, Fujin didn't shoot out the jutsu. Instead, the smaller vacuum bullets inside the 10 cores were launched. In a second, 15 rounds of vacuum Gatling were launched. In all, 150 bullets hit the ground, creating 150 new holes in the ground. Fujin thought this jutsu was a surprise. I was initially not very interested in applying this technique to vacuum Gatling. After all, it sacrifices the most important aspect of the jutsu for which I had created the vacuum Gatling jutsu. The vacuum infinite Gatling takes quite a long time to create as compared to the vacuum Gatling. I can't catch even a normal jounin by surprise with this. However, it instead allows me to shoot a ridiculous amount of vacuum bullets, justifying its name. So, even though the enemy will see it coming, dodging it won't be an easy task. If I had this jutsu, when Kitsuchi ambushed me with those IWA jounins, I would have slaughtered all of them in a few breaths. Vacuum Infinite Gatling was a jutsu that surprised Fujin. He didn't have such great expectations from it. He was very pleased. Fujin extended his right hand and stretched his palm. He was about to try the 5th and the last vacuum jutsu he had created and mastered in the last week. Though Fujin had created several types of vacuum cores, the overall volume of each core would be quite low. However, the next jutsu was an exception. The vacuum core that formed in front of his palm was as big as a raisin can. Since its size was the largest by a huge distance, the amount of vacuum cores it could contain was also the highest by a huge margin. A total of 729 vacuum cores formed inside the large vacuum core. Of course, creating so many vacuum cores took a long time as well and consumed a lot of Fujin's chakra. Fujin's wind chakra engulfed the vacuum core and began spinning around it rapidly, increasing its size further. Wind release. Vacuum trap ball. Fujin released the ball while gathering chakra on his feet. It traveled to the center of the ground trapped between the 4 ramparts. The ball suddenly crumbled and vacuum blades were launched in every direction at a blinding speed. A staggering 729 vacuum blades were launched from the vacuum trap ball. More importantly, Fujin had no control over any of the vacuum blades. Some vacuum blades hit the ground, creating more scars on the ground. Some hit the 4 ramparts surrounding the ground, causing all of them to collapse. Some flew into the sky and killed a couple of unlucky birds and dispersed after traveling a long distance. One vacuum blade also flew to exactly where Fujin was standing. Fortunately, he was prepared ever since he almost lost his life when he tried the jutsu the first time. He immediately moved to his left as the vacuum blade flew past his previous location. However, soon after, he had to jump because the rampart he was standing on collapsed. As he landed on the ground and was engulfed in dust, Fujin thought, I didn't think applying this technique to the vacuum blade jutsu in this manner would result in such a ridiculous result. I'd have named it the vacuum Big Bang jutsu if I could control the vacuum blades inside it. Anyway, for the time being, this name suits it perfectly. Who'd expect that small ball to create such devastation? The core of Vacuum Blade is quite similar to the core of Vacuum Wave. It is flexible in shape. As a result, I could create elongated cores which kept coiling around the center in the larger vacuum core. Since the core is outside my body, I don't need to be considerate about its size. Due to these two factors, I could fit in a ridiculous amount of vacuum cores inside it. That said, though the jutsu is very strong, it does have a few limitations. The speed of the jutsu before it explodes and unleashes the vacuum blades isn't fast enough. If someone is alarmed and moves a long distance away, then they can dodge it just like I did. Another issue is the amount of time needed to create it. My enemy will have a chance to attack me multiple times while I am creating it. Fortunately, I can move around freely while creating it. Another issue is that I can be hit by the jutsu as well, meaning that I can't let it explode very close to me. Of course, in a battle, using this level of jutsu isn't practical. If I fail to hit, then the amount of chakra wastage would be unjustified as well. The only way I can use it is by reducing the number of vacuum cores inside it significantly. The real usage of this jutsu is using it as a suicide attack or a trap. If my clones use this jutsu like a Rasengan and try to slam it into my enemy, he will be dead even if he defends or barely dodges the ball. Another possible usage is using it like a trap. Though I can't control the vacuum blades after the ball explodes, the ball itself is very stable. If I can seal the ball and store it stably, then it can become a deadly trap. A mischievous grin appeared on Fujin's face as he thought, imagine if someone broke into my house. They'll first have to worry about the ridiculous amount of seals there. And if they somehow make it inside, they'll be welcomed by a few hundred or a few thousand vacuum blades. The thought made Fujin chuckle. He thought, unfortunately, it would also destroy my house. So it is better to avoid it. That said, bases outside the village are a fair game. After all, I can build as many as I want. It only takes a little bit of time. If I can succeed in sealing this jutsu, then it'll be a good trap against any invaders. Fujin took a deep breath and took a look at the collapsed ramparts. The training ground was a mess once again. Fujin thought, it's time to switch my attention back to Flying Thunder God. I also need to analyze those 2 curse seals that Danzo uses on root ninjas and need to create my own curse seal. Fujin sighed and thought, it's been a long time since I have been working on Flying Thunder God Jutsu. It's time to completely master it. Until I'm done, I won't be taking any missions or doing any task that will require a lot of time. Fujin resolved himself. He fixed the training ground, creating the 4 large ramparts once again for future training. Once he was done, he focused entirely on his training, detaching himself from the other happenings in the ninja world. Chapter 469. 3 months later, huff, 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 deep breathing sounds were heard in the basement. A 15-year-old youngster was on his knees, his hand resting against a pillar. His body was covered in sweat. His chakra was exhausted. It looked like he was barely hanging on. However, contrary to his physical state, a wide smile could be seen on his face despite the fact that he was breathing heavily. Suddenly, the smile grew wider, and the youngster began laughing in an unbridled manner. Ha ha ha! The sound of deep breathing was replaced by continuous laughter. Fortunately, the basement was sealed. If he was outside, people would wonder if he had some issues. Finally, the youngster took his hand off the pillar and sat with his back resting against the pillar. He constantly switched between laughter and breathing heavily. The spot from where the youngster removed his hand had a small mark. Fujin took a few minutes to catch his breath. However, the smile was plastered on his face. He thought, I did it. I'm the 3rd person in Konoha, and perhaps in the history of this world, to master the Flying Thunder God Jutsu. He continued taking deep breaths while thinking, this damn jutsu. For so long I felt like I was close to learning it. It still took me 3 months to finally master it. Also, how insane was that pressure? It sapped all my chakra when I tried resisting it. Though my clones also experienced that pressure, it was far more intense for me. Why is it so? Fujin couldn't be sure. He could only guess. Is it because my chakra is far greater than my clones? I doubt it. Even when my chakra decreased, the pressure didn't decrease. Besides, the clones that tried entering the void dimension didn't necessarily have the same chakra. if not chakra level? Could it be because I'm a being made of flesh and blood instead of a chakra construct? Fujin felt that this was the case. Unfortunately, the scroll Hiruzen provided didn't have any information regarding this matter to verify his speculations. Fujin thought, after I enter the void dimension, I have to resist the pressure while locating the mark I want and creating a connection with that mark. Both of them take a lot of chakra. Moving through the dimension takes some chakra as well, though it isn't much. From what Tobarama wrote, the amount of chakra I consume will reduce once I get used to the pressure. If I can locate the mark and teleport in an instant, then I won't have to resist any pressure. Only at that stage, this jutsu can be freely used in battle with very little chakra expenditure. Fortunately, it isn't very difficult. I'll just need to practice it a few tens of thousands of times to reach that stage. Once I do, I'll need to start working on increasing the range I can teleport. For now, I have been only practicing in the basement. My shadow clones can freely teleport to any marker in my house. This distance isn't enough to escape, but it is good enough to be a menace on the battlefield. That said, how do I practice teleporting a longer range? I can't practice it in the open. Hiruzen will notice me without the seals. I can't place seals all around the village to create hiding spots either. Even if I come up with a bullshit excuse, Hiruzen and Danzo will be suspicious and investigate further. Should I openly claim that I have mastered this jutsu? Fujin thought for a bit and shook his head. He decided, no, I am planning some crazy things to do in the future. I might need the Flying Thunder God than if I need to escape. If it is common knowledge that I know this jutsu, then it'll become very easy to link it to me. Though I'm not scared, it'll be a huge headache if Akatsuki and enemy Kage begin targeting me openly. If that happens, I'm not sure if Hiruzen or Tsunade would support me if those things come to light. Regardless, such obstructions will slow down my plans considerably. It's best to keep it a secret. If I have to use it, everyone who sees me using it has to die. But if I keep it hidden, how do I train it? Fujin was in a dilemma. He placed his chin on his hands and thought while he was staring at the ground. Suddenly, he realized, wait a minute, I just need space to teleport. Why does it have to be on land? I have to think in terms of altitude, or rather depth. I'll just practice underground. To start with, I'll dig a hole and cover it in seals to prevent anyone from detecting it. I can go as deep as the temperature allows me to. It'll allow me to increase my range considerably. Once I increase the range to beyond a few hundred meters, I can just go to the wall around the village and teleport my shadow clones outside. They can move some distance away from the village and practice longer range teleportations. That should do. If I still face any issues, then I can only go to Mount Matiki and practice there. Fujin was satisfied with his training plan. However, there was one thing still on his mind that he couldn't get rid of. He thought, why was the pressure on me in the void dimension so high? Also, what happens if I can't resist it? My clones get dispelled once they can't resist it. But they are chakra constructs while I'm a living being. Will I be killed by the pressure? But if there is such a huge risk, why didn't Tobarama or Minato mention it? Also, why didn't they use it to kill their opponents? Can't I just teleport an enemy here and wait for them to die due to the pressure? If that is the case, there should have been no one who could resist Minato and Tobarama. Even Hashirama and Madara wouldn't survive that. Perhaps only Obito and Kagaya could due to them having access to their own dimensions. However, they couldn't do that. So, what is that I am missing? Fujin thought for a long time and thought of several possible answers, but he couldn't be sure of any of them. He decided, I'll need to experiment. This is too big of a danger to ignore. Unfortunately, my clones can't help me. I'll need to take a risk to find out the truth. I need to wait until my chakra recovers. Fujin had become impatient. He wanted to uncover the truth as soon as he could. He grabbed a small bottle and consumed a pill from it. Sitting with his back against the pillar, Fujin closed his eyes and began meditating. A couple of hours later, Fujin's chakra had completely recovered. He opened his eyes and thought, this might be the most risky act I have done in this world. Probably even more risky than when Rashi fired that tailed beast bomb at me. I hope everything goes well. Fujin focused on one of the Flying Thunder God marks in the basement. A moment later, his body disappeared and entered into the void dimension. An immense pressure was applied on him, and he instinctively used his chakra to defend himself. He muttered, "Here goes nothing." Suddenly, Fujin stopped using his chakra to defend against the pressure. His chakra reserves were still quite full. His mind was at the highest alert. He was prepared to use the chakra to defend himself once again if his body couldn't bear the pressure. To Fujin's surprise, as soon as he stopped resisting, his body was expelled out of the void dimension and he appeared at the same spot in his basement. A wry smile appeared on Fujin's face as he thought, "No wonder they didn't say anything. We just get pushed out if we run out of chakra to resist the pressure. That's quite convenient. Now I see why this method can't be used to kill other nin." Suddenly, Fujin had another idea. He analyzed, "Wait, even if I can't send other ninjas to this dimension to kill them, can I send them here just to exhaust their chakra? After all, any rank S ninja will instinctively resist the pressure. And in a dimension where they can't see, smell, hear, feel, or sense anything, they'll exert themselves to the fullest just to survive." Fujin thought for a bit before concluding, "Yes, this seems practical. The only issue is that this method was never used before either and isn't mentioned in the scroll. Neither Tobarama nor Minato should be stupid enough to overlook such a simple thing. I guess I'll need to find a test subject to experiment on." Chapter 470, Twisted Personality. Fujin's first thought was to use his summons to experiment. However, he quickly shook his head and decided, "No, I'm still new at using this jutsu. Even though it is unlikely if an accident happens and one of them dies, then that will be a great loss. I'll leave the village once again and find some rogue ninjas to experiment on. That said, I need to practice this jutsu a bit before going out to experiment. I'm also very close to completing that seal. I'll go out once I'm done with that task. I also need to meet up with Shigeki and actually start working on the organization. So it's been a long time since I met Shigeki." Thinking of Shigeki, a weird expression appeared on Fujin's face. Kasai Shigeki was the jounin from Tanigakure, whom Fujin had rescued while he was returning from the Land of Wind after completing his Umbu promotion mission. Fujin made Shigeki the first member of his non-existent organization after making some promises and lying about the organization. However, it had been a long time since he had met him. Fujin wondered, would he still be even there? It's been over 2.5 years. I won't be surprised if he left by now. Even though I promised to help him take the revenge, it won't be a surprise if he lost his patience after such a long time and left to get it himself. Fujin let out a sigh and thought, "Oh well, nothing I can do. It was too early to start an organization in any case. If he has left, I will just have to start over. Besides, I didn't make much effort to recruit Shigeki or spend any resources or time. So I won't be losing anything." There was nothing Fujin could do about it. The situation just didn't allow him to do much about it. Even though he could have met Shigeki after he left the Umbu, there wasn't anything for Fujin to say to him. Fujin stopped thinking about him and continued his training. The soldier pill he consumed would stay active for 5 days, and Fujin would require another couple of days of rest after that. Fujin decided that he would completely master the Flying Thunder God Jutsu for low range within these 5 days. Fujin made rapid improvements. His clones had already practiced the jutsu for sufficient time in order to ensure that he wouldn't face any danger. As a result, his main body was getting used to it rapidly as well. Every day, he became more accustomed to teleporting using the void dimension as a medium. 3 days later, Fujin's bell rang, marking the first time he was disturbed in recent days. Fujin was planning to ignore it and focus on his training. However, the bell kept ringing continuously. An annoyed expression appeared on Fujin's face. He cursed, "Which bastard is it?" He activated his chakra field and sighed while muttering, "I should have known." A shadow clone popped next to him and left the basement. He opened the door and saw an overenthusiastic blonde boy. Naruto excitedly said, "Fujin, I managed to stick the leaf to my forehead for 2 hours straight." Naruto was extremely excited. Though Fujin taught him a few wind jutsus, which he had to work hard to learn, it was this exercise that was the most difficult for him to complete. Fujin's clone thought, he finally managed to do it. His speed fell considerably in this exercise. I expected him to reach this stage a month and a half ago. By comparison, He has progressed rapidly in Wind Jutsus. I suppose he just got bored and lost his drive. Well, not surprising considering how boring it is. Naruto said, "You promised me that you'll teach me something cool after I manage to do it." Fujin's clone nodded and said, "Sure, but show it to me first." Naruto's expression became awkward. He asked, "Can't we directly begin learning it?" Fujin's clone shook his head and said, "It is important to have your basics right. Otherwise, major issues can happen when you try to learn what I am about to teach you. In the worst-case scenario, you will be injured and might not be able to leave the hospital for weeks." Fujin's clone's expression was extremely strict and serious. It was so serious that Naruto gulped in nervousness. He said, "All right, I'll do it." The clone thought, "Who told you to keep ringing the bell and disturb me? Now sit in one place for another couple of hours." What the clone said was obviously bullshit. Though Naruto could get injured due to falling, it wouldn't be serious enough to even visit the hospital, let alone be admitted for several weeks. Naruto and Fujin's clone walked over to the training ground. Naruto grabbed a leaf and obediently sat down to meditate. He placed the leaf on his forehead and closed his eyes. Fujin's clone set a timer on a stopwatch and sat in front of him. 1 hour and 53 minutes later, Naruto couldn't maintain control anymore. Naruto opened his eyes and looked at the stopwatch. His eyes widened as he realized that he was 7 minutes short. He looked at Fujin's clone, only to see Fujin looking back at him with a deadpan expression. Naruto became nervous and said, "I really held it for 2 hours earlier. I don't know how I fell short right now." Fujin's clone sighed and said, "It's fine. I guess it was a one-time thing. You'll still need some time to be able to do it every time." Naruto became dejected on hearing that. He would still have to wait for some time. Fujin's clone watched the range of emotions and panic on Naruto's face until he was satisfied. With a smile, he said, "But this is good enough. I'll train you now." Immediately, Naruto became very happy and cheered loudly. The clone sighed internally and thought, "Dealing with Hiruzen and Shikaka frequently has made me weird. Since when did I begin taking pleasure out of making others feel an emotional turmoil?" Fujin did take pleasure in making experienced folks like Hiruzen and Shikaka feel such turmoil. But that was different. Both were extremely experienced and shrewd. Fujin initially enjoyed it because of the challenge of achieving that, and due to how stuck up those two were. However, it was different with Naruto. Naruto was the complete opposite of those two. He was naive, inexperienced, and listened to Fujin obediently. So Fujin didn't expect that he'd get the same pleasure from making him experience that. Fujin's clone muttered to himself, "Those two geezers twisted my personality. Either that or perhaps because I know that Naruto will become very strong in the future as well. So whatever." Naruto broke Fujin's train of thought by asking, "What will we be learning?" Fujin's clone said, "I'll teach you how to climb trees." Now, it was Naruto's turn to watch Fujin's clone with a deadpan expression. A smirk appeared on the clone's face. Naruto complained, "I already know how to do that, believe it. Teach me something cool." Fujin's clone chuckled and asked, "Are you sure you can do it?" The clone got up and walked to a tree. To Naruto's shock, he began walking up the tree with just his feet while his hands were in his pockets. He soon stood upside down on a branch and asked, "Is this cool enough?" Naruto immediately nodded repeatedly and said, "Super cool. How did you do it?" Fujin's clone answered, "To do this, you have to release chakra from the bottom of your feet. Use that chakra to stick to the tree. Then you can climb on trees like I did. Try it." Naruto immediately released chakra from his feet and tried climbing on the tree. Needless to say, his feet slipped and he fell to the ground. Fujin's clone chuckled and said, "It's not that easy. The chakra you release from your feet has to be an exact amount. If it is too little, your feet will slip and you'll fall down. If it is too much, you'll damage the trunk and won't be able to continue walking up. So, it requires very good chakra control. That is why I had you do the leaf concentration exercise until you could reach 2 hours." Naruto nodded and said, "All right, I'll try it." Fujin's clone stopped sticking to the branch and dropped to the ground. He made a hand seal and slammed his hands to the ground. Immediately, some changes happened on the surface, but nothing much happened. Naruto looked at Fujin's clone with confusion. Fujin's clone said, I have softened the ground. So, even if you fall, you won't be hurt much. Keep training under this tree for the next half an hour. I'll teach you something else as well today. Naruto immediately became excited and continued trying to climb up the tree. Chapter 471. A New Path for Naruto. For the next half an hour, Naruto kept trying to climb the tree and consistently kept falling to the ground. Thanks to Fujin's clone, the ground was quite soft, so Naruto was barely hurt, if at all. Fujin's clone looked at Naruto and thought, I had initially planned to teach Naruto the 4 basic wind jutsus to get some inspiration from him for the wind domain. After all, he is very unconventional and usually comes up with crazy ideas. That said, my wind domain is more or less ready now. Jounins won't have any chance of survival if they enter my wind domain. Elite Jounins will struggle as well and are very unlikely to survive. Only if they have excellent defense and are able to move instinctively, they will be able to survive. Only rank S ninjas are difficult to kill. But once I manage to integrate Vacuum Blade Jutsu into my wind domain, they won't be able to rest easy either. As such, there is no longer much need to push Naruto in this direction. That said, there is no harm in doing so either. Maybe he'll give me a surprise. Even if that isn't the case, it'll be interesting to see how Naruto does with this technique at his disposal. Fujin had been very careful while teaching Naruto. Unlike others, he knew how scary Naruto's potential was. If he trained Naruto seriously, the majority of the plot would have changed completely. However, within limits, Fujin was curious to see how Naruto would grow when he had a few more options. After all, until Naruto met Jiraiya, his jutsu repertoire was extremely pathetic. He only knew the transformation jutsu, substitution jutsu, and the shadow clone jutsu. The only thing he could do was leverage his vast chakra reserves, spam the shadow clone jutsu, and use ordinary taijutsu along with shurikens and kunai. Only after he learned the summoning jutsu and the Rasengan did he gain more variety. However, even that was extremely limited. By comparison, Fujin knew close to 100 jutsus, and he was still far inferior in this aspect when compared to the likes of Orochimaru, Hiruzen, or Kakashi. While knowing more jutsus didn't mean that they used all the jutsus or that all jutsus would be strong, it allowed them to choose the jutsus that suited them the most. In addition, there could be circumstances where a particular jutsu or a particular element was extremely effective. In such instances, having a range of jutsus was extremely effective. Naruto, despite his insane chakra reserves, didn't have this advantage until the very end. After Naruto fell for the umpteenth time, Fujin's clone said, That's enough for today. You can keep practicing this later on. Come here. Naruto immediately got up and rushed towards Fujin's clone. While he was interested in climbing on the tree, he was more interested in knowing what new technique Fujin wanted to teach him again. Fujin's clone said, Naruto, display the 4 jutsus I taught you so far. Naruto was confused, but he did so without any questions. He weaved a few hand signs and pushed his right palm forward. A gentle breeze was released from his palm. He grabbed a few wooden shurikens and threw them into the air and quickly made a few hand seals. He was able to change their direction 40 degrees to the right and once again changed it 20 degrees to the left before the shurikens collided with a tree. He then displayed wind levitation jutsu by making a few leaves and small stones levitate, and then used wind retrieving jutsu to pull some leaves towards himself and catch a couple of them. He looked at Fujin's clone with a proud expression and said, I told you I'll master them. Believe it. Fujin's clone nodded and said, You did well. However, these are only the basics. You should continue practicing them, but practice them in these ways. Naruto was confused. Fujin's clone instructed, Place a few wooden shurikens around 5 meters away. Naruto followed his instruction and returned to his side. Fujin's clone said, Now use the wind levitation jutsu and make them float. Naruto weaved hand signs and shouted, Wind levitation jutsu. Immediately, the 6 wooden shurikens began levitating a couple of feet above the ground. Fujin's clone instructed, Now use the gale jutsu exactly on the shurikens. Force them to move forward like you have thrown them. Naruto began weaving the hand signs for the gale jutsu. However, by the time he had completed them, the shurikens dropped to the ground. Naruto complained, "That is very difficult. How can I keep them floating if I have to weave hand signs for Gale Jutsu?" Fujin's clone replied, "With the training, of course. Watch." For the sake of showing it to Naruto, Fujin's clone weaved hand signs while saying, "From here onwards, you should practice these jutsus until you can do this. First, use the wind levitation jutsu to make the shurikens float in the air." The shurikens on the ground began levitating once again. Fujin's clone quickly used the Gale Jutsu and blew the shurikens away and said, "Then use the Gale Jutsu to make the shurikens fly away at a fast speed and control them with the projectile control jutsu." He quickly changed the hand seals and then began using the projectile control jutsu to control the path of the wooden shurikens. Finally, he changed hand seals one last time and caused the wooden shurikens to fly back towards him. He grabbed the shurikens and added, and lastly, used the wind retrieving jutsu to grab the shurikens. Naruto watched with astonishment as Fujin flawlessly switched between the 4 jutsus. However, remembering what he had seen Fujin do with the wind previously, Naruto wasn't that surprised anymore. He still exclaimed, "That was so cool." Fujin's clone said, "From here onwards, you'll do 3 things. The first is to try and climb the tree without using your hands. That'll improve your chakra control and allow you to move more freely during a fight. As for the wind jutsus I just showed you, you'll divide them into 2 parts. The first part is using wind levitation and Gale jutsus one after another. And the second is using projectile control jutsu and wind retrieving jutsu one after another. Once you're able to do those jutsus in pairs, you can try doing all 4 together at the same time like I did. You can even change the order in which you use them if you feel that it would make the combination stronger. Training just one thing would be boring and monotonous. Hence, Fujin's clone decided to give 3 training routines to Naruto. Naruto immediately nodded. He couldn't wait to try using all 4 jutsus at the same time. Fujin's clone added, "In order to progress faster, you have to follow another rule from now on. While pranking others, you are not allowed to use just one of these 4 jutsus. Instead, you have to use at least 2 of them one after the other." Naruto nodded and said, "All right. I'll prank everyone with 2 jutsus, believe it." Fujin's clone chuckled and said, "Go easy while pranking civilians. If you are pranking your teachers, then it's fine to go all out. If they're in a challenge, you can even try using your pranks on Lord Hokage. If you can prank him successfully, then you would have made a huge progress towards your goal." The clone had a gentle smile on his face. Naruto's eyes sparkled and said, "All right, I'll do that." The clone laughed in his mind while thinking, "I haven't messed with Hiruzen much in the last 3 months. I'm not sure if I'll get many opportunities in the future. It's time I pass the baton to Naruto. Can't let the poor old man feel lonely." The clone added, "You can leave and train by yourself, Naruto. I'll be a bit busy and we'll be heading out of the village soon. Master walking up the tree by the time I return. I'll teach you another cool trick when I return." Naruto was even more excited. He thanked Fujin and left. As Naruto left, the clone analyzed. Though these 4 basic jutsus won't increase his strength considerably, if he manages to use these 4 jutsus simultaneously at will, then his control over the wind will go far beyond what a genin, or perhaps even a chunin, can have. It forms the perfect base to learn the more complicated wind jutsus easily in the future. It'll be interesting to see how The clone suddenly received a set of memories. A grin appeared on his face as he thought, "It's about damn time." The clone disappeared in a cloud of smoke. Inside his basement, Fujin received the same memories as well. For the first time in 3 days, he stopped training the Flying Thunder God Jutsu for a reason other than running out of chakra. Chapter 472, Phantom Seal. Fujin stared at a seal in front of him. It was created by the shadow clone who dispelled himself and sent everyone the memories. A smile appeared on his face as he thought, "The cursed seal is finally complete." The cursed seal was shaped like a windmill with several symbols in it. Fujin thought, though I hadn't seen either of the seals before, studying it wasn't difficult as they were made of familiar symbols. The difficult part was learning how Danzo could create an imprint to ensure that others couldn't remove his seals. Fortunately, I managed to get a hang of it a week ago. I guess that's another reason to be thankful to Danzo. Danzo's help allowed Fujin to raise his wind vacuum technique to a whole new level. And now, he had also helped Fujin improve his Juinjutsu. Fujin's smile faded as he thought, unfortunately, while I can apply the curse seal at will, I can't apply my imprint at will. I can only do so if the one I'm planning the curse seal on doesn't resist. If there wasn't this flaw, then few ninjutsu grandmasters would have been the strongest ninjas in the elemental nations. It'd be stronger than any Kekkei Genkai. In fact, I doubt even the Manjikyu would be comparable to this ability. Fortunately, I don't need to inform the target about the abilities of this seal. As long as I have his or her consent and they don't resist, I can apply it to them. So it shouldn't be an issue for me to apply it to my subordinates. Not to mention, I can also add it to seals I place in any bases I create in the future. It'll increase their defenses considerably. Anyway, coming back to the seal, it has all the functions of Danzo's 2 seals in addition to a few more functions that I added. I also changed the structure and used a different method to construct them so that no one would be able to connect those 2 seals to each other. Of course, without anyone constraining me, my seal is far more powerful than what Danzo uses on the root ninjas. Unlike Danzo, Fujin didn't intend to use 2 different seals. Instead, he had merged the 2 seals into one, but the seal was still made of 2 different parts. The first part was similar to the Cursed Tongue Eradication seal. It would detect whether the ninja had any thoughts of divulging secrets of the organization. If the ninja ever tried to put those thoughts into action, the seal would activate and paralyze him. The only difference was that, unlike Danzo, it would alert Fujin that the seal was activated. In addition, it would also allow him to locate the position where the seal was. Of course, it wasn't a godly ability and was instead an application of the Flying Thunder God mark. As such, Fujin could only locate the position if it was within the range Fujin could detect it. During the 3 months of training, Fujin's range of detection had increased from 15 kilometers to 80 kilometers. His space-time sensing technique's range had also increased from 4.5 kilometers to 12 kilometers. As such, it was far superior to Fujin's chakra field. Regardless, for the time being, Fujin wouldn't be able to detect the location of the seal if it went off in the Land of Rivers while he was in Konoha. Once the seal was activated, the paralyzed person would stay paralyzed until Fujin decided to stop it, or if another Grandmaster or someone who knew how to stop it helped him out. Of course, even if the Grandmaster helped him, the seal would reform, not allowing any information to be leaked. The second part was even more strengthened. Unlike Danzo's seal, which was activated only when it detected foreign Yin chakra, Fujin added another feature. Not only would it activate when a foreign Yin chakra tries to infiltrate the brain, but it would also activate if a Grandmaster tried to remove the first part of the seal. While the seal couldn't be removed thanks to Fujin's imprint, Fujin had left a small portion of the seal unprotected by his imprint. It was still extremely complicated, implying that only a few ninjutsu Grandmaster could successfully remove it. As soon as that portion of the seal was destroyed, the second part of the seal would attack the Grandmaster in a similar way Fujin was attacked when he tried reading the memories of the root ninja he killed. In addition, it would also transfer a Flying Thunder God mark onto that person, allowing me to hunt down that person later on. On the other hand, if someone tried reading his memories, the effect would be very similar. The enemy will be attacked while the seal will destroy the brain of the one who bears this seal, killing him or her in the process. However, there were 2 big differences. The first one was that the second seal also contained Fujin's Flying Thunder God mark. As such, he would be able to teleport to every ninja who had this seal once his range increased. And secondly, enemy Yin chakra wasn't the only condition to activate the seal, killing the ninja in the process. Fujin could activate the seal at will. The life of every person in his organization would be in Fujin's hands. If Danzo could have his way, he would have added this ability to the seals as well. Unfortunately for him, even though he had full control over the root, he still had to adhere to certain limits. Hiruzen watched over his actions. Creating such a seal was something Hiruzen would never allow. Even if Hiruzen allowed it, as long as others learn of it, every clan in Konoha would have been in an open rebellion. Either the two of them would have been overthrown or the village would have collapsed. Luckily for Fujin, he didn't have any such constraints. Unless one of his subordinates became a grandmaster in Fuinjutsu, they wouldn't even be aware of the fact that Fujin could kill them with a thought. Of course, Fujin had no intention of being a tyrant like Danzo or Orochimaru. He had only added that ability to take out any spies or traitors. He didn't intend to force the members to do something that went completely against their will. There was another major difference between Fujin's and Danzo's seals. Danzo's Cursed Tongue Eradication Seal was visible on the tongues of root ninjas, while his other seal was hidden. In the case of Fujin's seal, both parts of his seal were hidden. As such, an enemy was extremely unlikely to discover the seal before the first part was activated. The second part was even more difficult to detect, as it was further hidden by the first part of the seal. Unless someone managed to remove a part of the seal, it wasn't possible to understand what was hidden. However, if someone managed to do so, they would activate the second part of the seal, making it impossible to study it. Not to mention, the seal had Fujin's imprint. So only the part of the seal that Fujin had purposefully not protected by the imprint could be removed, and it wouldn't be sufficient for anyone to study the second part of the seal. In all, it was quite an effective and disgusting seal. It was an extremely effective seal for ensuring discipline and maintaining control in an organization. And it was disgusting for anyone trying to undo the seal. It was filled with several traps. Once Fujin's Flying Thunder God's range improved, he could directly send shadow clones who had prepared rank S jutsus to the location of the seal and destroy anyone who had captured his subordinates and was trying to undo the seal. Fujin was extremely pleased with the seal. He had worked quite hard to cover all aspects he wanted to. He spent a couple of hours making an imprint of the new seal. He looked at his left palm where the new seal imprint was created and thought, this seal? I'll call it the Phantom Seal. It will be the sign of every member of my organization. It will also go well with the name I have thought of. Fujin smiled and muttered, the name of my alliance will be Chapter 473, Phantom Haven Society. Fujin smiled and muttered, the name of my alliance will be Phantom Haven Society. During the last 3 months, whenever Fujin wasn't training, he had spent a lot of time thinking about what to do with the organization. His reasons for creating the organization were extremely selfish. Fujin desperately needed a better way of getting information. Konoha was obviously very good at it. However, Fujin had no control over it. Jiraiya's information network was the most famous, but all his findings would only be reported to Hiruzen. Hiruzen would only share the information with Fujin if saw any need to. Otherwise, Fujin wouldn't be able to access any information at all. Danzo had his spy network as well, but he didn't even share his findings with Hiruzen unless he had something to gain from it. Fujin had no chance of getting access to it. The only information network Fujin had access to was Umbu's information network. Even though he wasn't a part of the Umbu anymore, Fujin could still access it and did so every once in a while. However, once again, the information was filtered by the Umbu commander. Information could still be hidden from Fujin. Not to mention, there were limitations. If Fujin discovered some important information and decided to do something about it, it would be child's play for Hiruzen to link the related events to Fujin. If Fujin did something that harmed Konoha's interests, it would strain his relationship with Hiruzen, and Hiruzen could restrict his access to intelligence. As a result, having his own organization that gathered information would be very helpful to Fujin. Another aspect was gaining some capable subordinates. While Fujin wasn't very interested in this aspect initially, as he preferred to rely on his own strength, he realized the importance of having capable subordinates when he was trying to study Zankaku's dead body. If he had a subordinate like Kabuto, he could leave the task to him. Even without someone as capable as Kabuto, having a few ninjas who specialized in medical ninjutsu could have helped Fujin a lot. As a result, if Fujin could raise some capable subordinates in each field through such an organization, it could make his life quite easier. Though it was unlikely that Fujin could raise rank S ninjas before the start of the Fourth Great War, especially considering the fact that Fujin would be spending most of his time in Konoha, the organization had the potential to flourish once a power vacuum was created after Akatsuki's destruction and death of the majority of the ninjas in the next Great Ninja War. Though Fujin hadn't completely planned out what he would do after the war, having this option would give him a lot of options and flexibility. Unfortunately, all these reasons were extremely selfish. Who would like to be a part of an organization if these reasons were listed? So, Fujin needed a noble purpose and a dream. A purpose that people would be passionate to follow. A dream that people would be willing to give their lives up to achieve. Thankfully, in the current world, it wasn't difficult to come up with a good reason. After all, the world was a complete mess. Only the major and the minor villages enjoyed long periods of peace in between wars. The people who didn't live there had an extremely difficult life. It would only take one unfortunate event for them to die or lose their family members and fall into misery. In addition, Fujin knew the reason behind Akatsuki's formation. He knew what Orochimaru did. He knew how Konoha depended on the will of fire to rile everyone. He knew how Danzo trained the root ninjas, so he wasn't lacking in knowledge. The only question was whether Fujin could utilize the knowledge properly and implement the right plans. Fujin muttered, "I finalized almost every detail I could think of. I hope I didn't forget anything, and what I thought of is sufficient to start it." Though Fujin planned a lot, he was still not sure about whether he would succeed. After all, he had never tried anything like that. He decided to stop being worried about it and focused on his training once again. 4 days later, Fujin accepted a bunch of elimination missions and began heading towards the land of grass. Unlike the last time, Fujin didn't intend to use the bandits as test subjects for practicing memory reading. As a result, he moved very quickly while eliminating every bandit camp in his path. He continued the slaughter until he ran into a trio of rogue ninjas who were on his hit list as well. In the middle of the forest, 3 middle-aged rogue ninjas were facing Fujin. All 3 looked quite similar to each other in terms of facial features. Their headbands showed that they were formerly from the Land of Rain. One of them said, "Big brother, it looks like Konoha is now sending kids against us." Another added, "Konoha has been trying to hunt us for 3 years. It's about time that we make them regret." Haha. Fujin looked at the 3 of them like they were retards and thought, "They are from Hidden Rain? I wonder whether Nagato has already killed Hanzo. Oh well, time to see how it goes." The 3 grabbed their kunais. The oldest one among them walked forward towards Fujin and asked, "Are you scared, BR?" Before he could complete his question, Fujin disappeared in front of his eyes. At the same time, the rogue ninja's arms also disappeared. It happened so quickly that he didn't even feel pain and just saw a red line. When he looked at his arms, he was horrified to see both of them sliced clean. A horrifying scream escaped his throat. It scared away some of the animals and birds around that place. The remaining 2 rogue ninjas were just as shocked. Before they could react, both were in the same state. In fact, Fujin went a step further and cut off their legs as well to prevent them from trying to run away. They began screaming in horror as well. Neither of them expected such a result. They looked up to see Fujin standing next to the first guy he attacked. This time, Fujin no longer seemed like a youngster in their eyes. Instead, he seemed like a terrifying and bloodthirsty demon. Their screams began desperate as they apologized and begged for mercy. However, Fujin ignored them. He had already sensed the area, and there was no ninja in the vicinity. He didn't care how loudly they shouted. Fujin thought, it's not bad to be ignorant, but people should at least stay aware of the reality. Don't go around threatening someone if you don't know who that person is. Though they would have still died, perhaps it would have been a little less dreadful. The first rogue ninja looked at Fujin and asked in terror, "Who are you? What do you want?" Fujin didn't say anything and instead placed his palm on his chest. In an instant, the rogue ninja disappeared from the Land of Fire and appeared in the Void Dimension. However, a moment later, he was ejected and appeared in front of Fujin once again. A frown formed on Fujin's face as he analyzed. His chakra didn't decrease at all. On second thought, he barely stayed in that dimension for even a moment. I didn't seal his chakra because I wanted to experiment with this idea. But why did nothing happen? Though he is barely at the Chunin level, his chakra is still higher than some of my shadow clones when they tried entering the Void Dimension. So, it shouldn't be a matter of strength. Is he so terrified that he can't resist? Or is he incapable of resisting for some reason? Fujin couldn't be sure. He sent the rogue ninja into the void dimension several times, but the result was still the same. Finally, he applied the self-cursing seal on the rogue ninja and began reading his memories. He realized, I see. It's not that he didn't try to resist. Rather, he did it and was still expelled from that dimension. Even with his chakra, he couldn't resist the pressure at all. That said, it isn't the issue with the amount of chakra. I guess only the ones who have some level of mastery of the space-time technique can resist the pressure. I guess using this to drain chakra of enemies isn't possible either. A shame. Fujin read his remaining memories before knocking him out. He tried sending the second rogue ninja to the void dimension as well, but the result was the same. He knocked him out as well after reading his memories. The third one was ejected as well. However, Fujin wanted to do one more experiment. Chapter 474, One Person, Three Identities. Fujin held the ninja and entered the void dimension along with him. Once again, he felt the pressure. He used his chakra to resist it. At the same time, he also used his chakra to help the rogue ninja resist it. The rogue ninja was finally able to stay in the void dimension. He was confused as he couldn't sense anything at all for a second. It was as if all his senses had been shut down. After verifying, Fujin stopped resisting and immediately returned back to the land of fire. He didn't want to exhaust a major chunk of his chakra for no reason. He analyzed the scroll was right. I need to help whoever I bring into the void dimension resist the pressure there. Of course, once my speed of teleporting increases, I won't need to resist pressure as I can complete the process in an instant. That said, bringing others with me will increase chakra consumption. The additional chakra I'll need will depend on the number of people I'm teleporting, their chakra levels, and whether they are resisting or not. Teleporting a tailed beast that doesn't want to be teleported will likely be impossible for the time being. Sigh. How much chakra did Minato have to teleport a complete Kurama? Fujin stopped thinking about it. There was no point in comparing himself with Minato. After all, Minato was already dead while he was still alive and kicking. He looked at the three rogue ninjas in front of him. Though he was done experimenting with the Flying Thunder God Jutsu, there was still another experiment he wanted to carry out. Fujin applied the Phantom Seal on the three of them and tested it out to confirm that there was no issue with the seal. After some time, Fujin thought, alright, it looks like there are no issues with the seal. Now, time to test the kill switch. Fujin made the confrontation hand seal and activated the three seals. In an instant, the brains of the three rogue ninjas were destroyed. Fujin nodded in satisfaction and followed up with his usual ritual of destroying and cremating the dead bodies and burying the ashes deep in the ground so that even Edo Tensei wouldn't be able to revive them. He continued the journey. He completed the missions he had accepted within a couple of days, while also testing out the Phantom Seal on the rogue ninjas he was supposed to eliminate. Needless to say, he had also left hundreds of Flying Thunder God marks between Konoha and the Land of Grass. Instead of returning to the village, he moved south and headed past the border between the Land of Fire and the Land of Rain to move towards the Land of Rivers. En route, Fujin changed his appearance to that of Shurden, the identity that he had used when he met Shigeki. He thought, I overlooked one aspect earlier. I was initially planning on using this Shurden identity to fight under disguise. However, Shurden will be the leader of the Phantom Haven Society. If my targets link Shurden to the Phantom Haven Society, then it will be destroyed in no time, wasting all the time and effort I'd be spending on it. It means that I can't use this identity for those purposes. I'll need a third identity as well. That identity will mostly fight with the lightning element. In that case, what should I use to fight while I'm Shurden? Fujin fell into deep thought. While he had learned a range of jutsus, there was only so much he could hide while still maintaining his strength. Fujin thought for a while before sighing and deciding. There are very few options. I can't use my vacuum jutsu. That is a dead giveaway. Even with lightning, I'll have to avoid overlaps, and I can't use the same fighting style. It means that I can't use my strongest jutsus and my most effective tricks. Flying Thunder God is also out of the question. Hiruzen will link it to me. Even if he dies, I'm not sure if he told anyone about giving me this jutsu. If Shikaka knows, he can link it as well. However, once my range increases, I can pretend to be using reverse summoning to get away, and I can do so with all three identities. Without wind and lightning release, my swords won't be very effective either. However, using chakra flow should be fine. That said, I'll need new swords for Shurden and the third identity, especially for the third identity. I wonder if that noble in the Land of Frost still has that chakra metal sword. His family's book on the incomplete research about merging wind and water to create Ice Kekii Genkai has been useless to me so far. Oh well, guess I'll steal it later. If he doesn't have it, then I'll have to pay a visit to the Land of Iron, either to make new swords or steal old ones. If I had created a Kekii Genkai, then I could have given it to this identity. After all, it is unlikely that an elemental Kekii Genkai will add much to my strength. If I had the Swift or Scorch Kekii Genkai, then I could have used them to enhance Shurgen's power. Unfortunately, I don't have either of them. Anyway, without all these options, I guess the only thing that is left is Fuin Jutsu. After all, my fire and earth elements kind of suck. Though I am known to be a grandmaster in Fuin Jutsu, not many know what my skills are. As long as I don't use the explosion seals I used against Juzo and Kakuzu, it'll be hard to link it to me. I can use the self-cursing seal and the chakra suppression seal liberally in my fight to restrict my opponents. Those will be the main skills of Shurden. Of course, that will be backed by my speed and strength. I'll use the body flicker jutsu for movement. For defense, I'll use barriers along with iron skin jutsu and earth wall jutsu. I'll use the samurai saber techniques with my swords once I get new ones. Perhaps I should add a fire jutsu for an AoE attack. I suppose searing migraine jutsu should be sufficient. Using some jinjutsu is fine as long as I avoid the bringer of darkness and wind-style jinjutsu. This should allow me to deal with elite jounins with some ease. As for stronger rank S ninjas, I can only hope to fend them off with Fuin Jutsu and make the fight a stalemate. Without Assassin's Rush Jutsu, I won't be able to get an advantage in speed. However, unless I'm facing the Raikage, I doubt anyone could use speed to defeat me either. That said, with so many restrictions, it's best if I don't fight with Shurden identity, especially against the ones I have already or will fight in the future. I'll only fight if the base is at risk. Even then, I'll hide behind a large number of seals and use them in the fight. The only reason for me to display my strength should be if an unruly rank S was raised through the Phantom Haven Society. Though I can use the Phantom Seal to suppress such a person, I don't want to follow the Hyuga model. Though effective in maintaining control, it is terrible in terms of morale and mentality. No matter how loyal, no one would want to place their lives in the hands of others. Fujin understood clearly that the real effects of the Phantom Seal should never be exposed to anyone. As for suppressing a rank S that might arise in the future, Fujin wasn't concerned. After all, he was still growing as well. The Phantom Haven Society wouldn't be able to raise a rank S ninja out of thin air. By the time such a ninja appeared, Fujin believed that his own strength would be at an entirely different level. Engrossed in his thoughts, Fujin, using Shiden's disguise, entered the Land of Rivers and moved towards the cave where he had left Shigeki. He couldn't help but wonder if Shigeki was still waiting or had already left. Chapter 475, A Capable Subordinate One. Moving at a rapid speed, Fujin reached close to the cave where Fujin had carved seals to create a safe hideout for Shigeki. When he was 12 kilometers from the cave, a smile appeared on Fujin's face. He thought, though I'm not sure it is him, I can sense a disturbance in the space-time field. If it is him, then I'll be impressed. To have such perseverance. I got lucky in being able to recruit such a good subordinate so easily. Gaining a capable person to handle matters when he wasn't present was important for the organization's ability to survive and become stronger. It was the reason why Fujin made a move when he got the chance. Though Fujin couldn't visit him since then, that also served a purpose. It allowed Fujin to test his character and perseverance. After all, Fujin was the one who saved his life and gave him an opportunity to get revenge for his family. While this wasn't something Fujin did intentionally, he wouldn't reject the observations he gained due to it. As he reached closer, Fujin could finally sense the chakra signature. Behind the mask, his smile grew wider. Meanwhile, inside the cave, Shigeki looked outside and wondered. Someone is able to sense me despite the seals in the cave? He immediately became alert. It was the first time someone had sensed him inside the cave. At the same time, he became hopeful and wondered, has the Lord returned? Shigeki hoped that was the case. However, he prepared himself for a battle as well. While Shigeki wouldn't stand out if placed in a strong village like Konoha, in a minor village, he was ranked quite highly. After training continuously for nearly 3 years, his confidence had grown. Very soon, Fujin appeared in front of the cave and entered it. On entering, he saw Shigeki in front of him. Shigeki immediately recognized him. He bowed slightly and said respectfully, "It's good to see you again, Lord Shurden." Fujin nodded and said, "Drop the Lord. It's good to see that you are still here, Shigeki. I'm impressed that you haven't left." On hearing the command to drop Lord, Shigeki sighed in relief. It wasn't anyone in disguise, nor had his savior's nature changed over the last 3 years. Shigeki said, "You saved my life and gave me an opportunity. I won't break my promise unless you do something that goes against my beliefs." Fujin nodded and said, "Good." Shigeki asked, "If I may ask, can you tell me why you didn't appear for so long?" While he did wait patiently, he couldn't help but think that Shurden had abandoned plans to build a branch there and hence hadn't come to visit him. Had he been strong enough to get his revenge, he might not have waited. Fujin nodded and said, "It was a test." Shigeki was surprised. He asked, "A test?" Fujin replied, "Yes. It served 2 purposes. The first purpose was to test your nature. If you had left during this time, then it would have implied that you are ungrateful and don't stick to your words. I wouldn't want someone like that in our organization. The second purpose was to test your perseverance. You were too weak to avenge your family back then. This time in isolation was the perfect environment for you to train yourself. I will need to check whether you have stayed true to yourself and your family and used this time well. Then I'll judge how you performed in this parameter." Shigeki was surprised. At the same time, he was relieved and thought, "Luckily, I didn't leave and kept training all the time." Shigeki nodded and said, "All right. I hope I don't disappoint you. Can you tell me more about the organization?" Fujin shook his head and said, "First, I'll need to see your strength. I'll then decide what your role will be and what you should know." Shigeki was surprised. He asked, "Should we fight here?" Fujin shook his head once again and said no. Though this place is decently hidden, a fight here can attract attention if someone is passing by. This is your first task for the organization. Identify a place in the land of rivers that is so remote that no one would visit there even by accident. Also, the place has to be large enough to house hundreds of people and have a lot of space for training, sparring, and other activities. Shigeki was surprised by Fujin's words and realized he plans on building a base. He thought for a bit and said, "I do know a couple of such locations." Fujin said, "Choose one and lead the way." Shigeki thought for a couple of minutes before saying, "All right, follow me." Shigeki began moving. Fujin followed him. The two moved around a couple of 100 meters, traveling past dozens of rivers. Finally, they entered a location that didn't have any rivers at all. Instead, there was an extremely deep and large valley, surrounded by mountains on all sides. Standing on the edge, Shigeki said, "No one in this country ever travels inside this valley. It has an extremely high number of deadly wild animals. Hence, normal people don't dare to enter. As a result, our ninjas never receive any missions to this place. Also, since there aren't any rivers nearby, there are no settlements for dozens of kilometers around this valley either. Another advantage is that there are no trade routes near this area. The closest trading route is the one between Sunagakure and Tanagakure, and even that is 37 kilometers away." Fujin thought for a bit and nodded. The location was excellent. Even if there were human settlements around the valley itself was extremely huge and deep, making sensors more or less useless unless they decided to venture in deep. In addition, the valley was covered in mist blocking sight. As a result, even if a fight happened in the valley, it wasn't possible for anyone to see any flashes. Fujin asked, "Is this valley always covered in mist?" Shigeki nodded. Fujin asked, "Did Tanagakure investigate the valley in the past?" Shigeki replied, "Yes. We did it sometime after the end of the first Great Ninja War. We were hoping to find some resources in the valley. Unfortunately, there wasn't anything worth considerable value to create a base in the valley. It has pretty much been abandoned since then. The only usage this valley sees is if Sunagakure or Kanehagakure are trying to sneak troops to the other side during a war. Even then, they mostly stay on the edges as it provides sufficient cover in any case. Fujin nodded and inquired about some more details, such as the wildlife and the presence of any poisonous species. Once he was satisfied, he said, "All right, this should be good enough. Let's go." Fujin began moving down the slope. The slope wasn't very steep, so normal people could still climb out if they went in as long as no wild animals attacked them. For Fujin and Shigeki, it wasn't worth mentioning. Shigeki followed Fujin and asked, "Where are we heading inside the valley?" A smile formed behind Fujin's mask as he said, "To the deepest point, obviously." Shigeki was surprised. The valley was surrounded by tall mountains. Compared to the edges, the deepest point of the valley was almost 1.5 kilometers deep. If it was a flat surface, then the deepest point would be around 10 kilometers away from the closest edge. As a result, the deepest point will be completely hidden from anyone. He couldn't help but wonder, is Shurden planning to create a base so deep in the valley? Wouldn't it make accessing it very difficult? Also, what's the purpose of this organization? He didn't even tell me the name of his organization. As they moved rapidly, Fujin asked, "Shigeki, before we fight, how would you evaluate your strengths?" Shigeki answered, "If I return to Tanagakure, then I'm sure I'll be able to contend for the spot of the strongest ninja in the village. If I was in a major village, I guess I would be an elite jounin." Fujin was surprised by his self-evaluation. That said, he didn't assume it to be true. After all, most minor villages didn't believe themselves to be much weaker than major villages. The only points where they accepted their inferiority were the absence of rank S ninjas, Jinchurikis, and the total number of ninjas. Fujin asked, "And what do you specialize in, and what are your abilities?" Fujin already knew the answer to this question. However, he didn't know what Shigeki did after their meeting. As such, he was curious to know. Shigeki answered, "I specialize in ninjutsus. More specifically, wind and water nature manipulation. The land of rivers is covered by numerous rivers. These two natures allowed me to restrict our enemies and keep them on the opposite bank. I'm decent at taijutsu and can use some jinjutsu as well, though they aren't as good as my ninjutsu." Fujin already knew that information. He asked, "And which are your strongest jutsus?" Chapter 476, A Capable Subordinate 2. Shigeki was about to answer when Fujin said, "Leave it, just use them in our spar. It won't be fair to you if I know everything beforehand." Shigeki nodded. The two traveled to the deepest part of the valley. As they ventured deeper into the valley, an expanse of lush, verdant landscape greeted their eyes. Towering trees draped in moss and vines, their canopies interlocking in a verdurous ceiling, cast intricate patterns of light and shadow across the forest floor. Due to the absence of human interference, myriad species of flora carpet the ground, from delicate ferns to vibrant, sprawling bushes bearing succulent fruits. Amid this tranquility, there was a range of wild animals. As he moved deeper, Fujin saw a bunch of deer, bison, and rabbits. He also saw various predatory animals, such as a small pack of wolves, a few sleek panthers hiding among the trees waiting for their prey, and an array of snakes, some poisonous and some gigantic. Fujin thought, "This brings back the memory of that wolf valley I entered while finding my summon. If the animals in this valley could use chakra as the summons can, then this valley would have been a forbidden area even for ninjas. Even rank S ninjas won't casually enter too deep if that was the case." Fortunately or unfortunately, it wasn't to be. Very quickly, Fujin and Shigeki reached the deepest part of the valley. The place was entirely covered in mist. Shigeki looked around and asked, "Are you sure that we should make our base here? The visibility isn't good, and this place isn't exactly safe." The area was sprawling with wild animals. While they weren't a concern for Fujin or Shigeki while they were awake, even they would be on guard while they slept. Fujin nodded and answered, "It's fine. Our spar will scare away the wild animals. As for the environment, I'll handle it." Don't worry. Fujin flickered and appeared 20 meters in front of Shigeki, facing him. While Shigeki couldn't see through the mask, he could see a pair of eyes staring at him. Fujin said, "Let's start. Come at me with the intention to kill me. Show me your full strength." Shigeki prepared himself and began building up his chakra. The wild animals, who were on guard and observing the two intruders who entered their territory, immediately began fleeing away on sensing his aura. Shigeki grabbed a kunai and said, "Here I come." Having trained continuously for nearly 3 years, Shigeki was excited to test his strength. If it wasn't for the fact that he wanted to keep his survival a secret, he would have long challenged other ninjas to a spar. At the same time, he was curious how strong Fujin, or rather Shurgan, was. After all, Fujin had killed his pursuers in the blink of an eye, giving him no opportunity to evaluate his strength. He moved forward at a fast speed and thrust his kunai towards Fujin's heart. However, Fujin easily moved out of the way. He continued attacking Fujin with his kunai, shot a few shurikens, and tried kicking several times, but Fujin dodged them all with relative ease. Fujin was about to counterattack when Shigeki retreated, realizing that he was completely outmatched in close combat. He began weaving hand signs as he moved away from Fujin. Fujin observed him and thought, "Those hand seals, the water dragon jutsu. Huh. Sigh, it is so tempting to attack. I'm too used to killing." Thankfully, my spars with Guy helped curb some of the killing instincts I developed during my Umbu days. That said, even if I wanted to, I doubt I could kill Guy even with a sneak attack. Of the ninjas I have seen fighting, he has the highest alertness other than Hiruzen. If Kakuza didn't have 5 lives, perhaps he would have been as alert as Hiruzen. A water dragon of this size? Not bad. Even in Konoha, he could be promoted to the Jounin rank, but only barely. As for elite Jounin, that's out of the question. As Fujin was thinking, a 25-meter-long water dragon formed in front of him. In a second, it came rushing straight at him. Shigeki saw as the water dragon hit Fujin and swallowed him. However, a frown formed on his face as he failed to see Fujin's figure anymore. As the water wave created by the water dragon hitting the spot Fujin was standing began settling, Shigeki looked around himself and thought, how did he disappear? Now that I think about it, he had disappeared the last time as well. All this mist around me, is he using the infamous hidden mist jutsu? Not good. He quickly weaved hand seals while keeping a watch around him to prevent any sneak attacks. Wind release. Great breakthrough jutsu. Instead of launching the jutsu in a direction, Shigeki spun once while exhaling high speed and razor-sharp winds. As a result, the winds moved in every direction, dispersing the mist around the area. Shigeki quickly looked to his right and saw Fujin standing around 50 meters from him. He couldn't help but wonder, how did he dodge those sharp winds? Or is he invulnerable to attack somehow? He didn't think much about it. In fact, even before the mist had dispersed, Shigeki had already begun weaving hand seals for the next jutsu. Water release. Exploding water colliding wave jutsu, Shigeki spat out a large volume of water from his mouth. It immediately turned into a giant wave. A major portion of the water moved in the direction of Fujin, but the rest spread equally in all directions. Seeing Fujin's ridiculous speed, Shigeki understood that single-target attacks would have no chance of hitting Fujin. A smile appeared on Fujin's face as he saw the massive volume of water heading towards him. He thought, not bad. Not bad at all. He's able to take advantage of the terrain very well. In a place where water is abundant, he'll be able to pack quite a punch. I'll need to correct my judgment. He will have no issue in becoming a Jounin in Konoha. Fujin would have to re-evaluate Shigeki once again. After all, he wasn't done. The massive amount of water was just the start. Even before it could reach Fujin, Shigeki had shot another great breakthrough jutsu, this time into the large amount of water he had just spat out. Fujin was intrigued. He quickly moved backwards while analyzing. Is he planning to use the great breakthrough jutsu to speed up the water? However, how will that be of any help against someone as fast as me? As Fujin expected, the speed of the water indeed increased. However, there was one thing he didn't anticipate. The winds didn't just speed up the water, but they also allowed Shigeki to control the water to a great extent. Dozens of water blades flew at Fujin at a rapid speed. It was far faster than a normal water jutsu. Fujin stepped out of the way, but his new position was bombarded with high-speed jets of water, forcing Fujin to flicker repeatedly. Shigeki observed Fujin's movements and thought, he is still able to dodge them so easily? How did he even train to have such a speed? I'll have to change my style of attack. He exhaled more wind into the water. A second later, hundreds of shurikens were shot at and around Fujin, leaving him no space to dodge. Of course, it wasn't enough to stop Fujin, who flickered a couple of times and appeared to Shigeki's left. For a moment, Shigeki was left speechless. He thought, he flickered such a long distance? Though my shurikens covered a large area, it was useless against him. How am I even supposed to land an attack on someone like him? As opposed to Shigeki's helplessness, Fujin was excited. He thought excitedly, he improved so much in these few years. Marvelous, to be able to keep me on my toes. Now let me see the limits of this combination jutsu. To Shigeki's surprise, Fujin flickered on top of the large water body he had created and shouted, "Give me your best shot." A sword appeared in Fujin's right hand. It wasn't his usual sword, and instead was just an ordinary sword he had picked up from the targets he eliminated earlier. With Fujin standing atop the water, Shigeki's attacks became much faster as they didn't need to travel. Fujin flickered continuously to dodge the incoming attacks. In most cases, he moved just a couple of meters away to dodge an attack. However, every now and then he'd be forced to flicker long distances or defend with his sword. Fujin stayed atop the water for 5 whole minutes, dodging everything Shigeki could throw at him. The combination jutsu surprised Fujin a lot. He had researched Shigeki before he left the village. Shigeki did have a history of using wind attacks and water bodies to block enemies from progressing. However, what he was using was in a completely different league. Fujin judged with excitement. He is good. He's at least on par with Takuhei from Yugikure. Though he still can't be considered an elite jounin, he isn't too far away. With my help, he'll reach it in no time at all. Anyway, it's time to end this. His chakra has almost run out. Chapter 477, the cover story. Fujin's figure suddenly disappeared. Shigeki couldn't see him, but could still track his movements due to the splash he would create whenever he stepped on the water. He tried attacking, however, he was late every time. After missing 3 attacks, Shigeki realized, he is coming towards me. In close range, I'm no match for him. He immediately weaved hand seals and shot another great breakthrough jutsu in the direction that Fujin was last in. However, at the next moment, he felt a light tap on his back. In an instant, various symbols covered his body. Shigeki became paralyzed. He couldn't move his body, nor could he use his chakra. He immediately realized, self-cursing seal, to be able to apply and activate it so quickly. He should be a grandmaster in Fuinjutsu. No one could detect that cave. Without Shigeki's control, the water began spreading in all directions. Fujin deactivated the seal and said, "That's enough for now. Your skills have impressed me." Shigeki smiled but didn't think much of it. He was already in his late 30s. Hearing such praises wasn't something that would make him happy. However, to his surprise, Fujin added, "That said, you are still some distance away from becoming an elite jounin." Shigeki was surprised. He wondered, even my combination jutsu won't allow me to fight against an elite jounin? Fujin continued, "Your chakra reserves are slightly lower, and they are unlikely to increase much considering your age. And you are still falling short in some aspects. Can you use the body flicker jutsu?" Shigeki nodded and said yes. "I just didn't use it in the fight because there wasn't any chance to use it." Fujin said good. "However, can you use it without any hand seals?" Shigeki replied no. Fujin advised, "The first thing you need to do is train yourself to use the body flicker jutsu without any hand seals. It will improve your mobility a lot, and you can move around like how I did. Other than that, your water manipulation and that combination jutsu is very impressive. But do you know any wind jutsu stronger than the Great Breakthrough Jutsu?" Shigeki shook his head and answered no. Tanagakure doesn't have many wind release jutsus. Due to the high number of rivers in this country, water release is the one that has been focused on the most. So I only had access to stronger water jutsus. Fujin replied, I see. In that case, I'll give you these. Fujin grabbed a couple of scrolls and handed them to Shigeki. He said, your water jutsus are sufficiently strong. I don't have anything that'll strengthen you in that aspect. However, your wind element can be strengthened. These are two of the strongest wind jutsus which are popular among the Sunagakure ninjas. The first is the rank B pressure damage jutsu. It is a wide-range jutsu that is far stronger than the Great Breakthrough jutsu. It will help you strengthen your combination jutsu. The second is the rank A blades of wind jutsu. It'll provide you with a good option to use in close combat, and will also make you versatile in battle. Shigeki was surprised once again. He thought, what the hell? Suna ninjas take pride in those jutsus. He just brought them out like this. Fujin already knew about Shigeki's skills. Though he had trained for a long time by himself, Shigeki didn't have access to new jutsus. As for creating original jutsus, that was extremely complicated and required a great deal of luck, inspiration, and skill. So, he had prepared these 2 jutsu scrolls for Shigeki. The information was from Konoha's library. However, Fujin changed the wording and added some of his own insights to ensure that no one would recognize it came from Konoha, even if someone from Konoha got their hands on it. Fujin actually intended to go one step further and teach Shadow Clone Jutsu. With Shadow Clones along with Soldier Pills, the speed of training could be increased by several times. It was especially helpful while learning chakra control, nature manipulation, or studying Fuin Jutsu and medical ninjutsu. However, after analyzing it for a long time, Fujin decided against it, thinking Konoha is quite protective about some of the secret jutsus like the Shadow Clone. It might not be able to do much if a major village began practicing it on a large scale, but if a minor village or an upcoming organization were to know it, Hiruzen would send forces to eliminate them. Heck, he might deploy me to do the job. Even if I'm able to save the organization, it'll restrict its movements heavily. Leave it. It's not as if I'm counting on anyone here to help me in a fight. There is no need to take such a needless risk. If I need a strong army in the future for some reason, then I'll reevaluate the situation. Shigeki looked at the scrolls again and said, thank you. I'll learn them immediately. Fujin said, once you learn these 2 jutsus and become capable of using body flicker seamlessly, then you should be able to contend against elite jounins from the major villages. Anyway, now on to the important topic. I'm sure you are curious about what organization I'm building and what our goals and purposes are. Shigeki nodded. Apart from taking revenge, this was the matter he thought of the most. Fujin said, the organization I'm building is called the Phantom Haven Society. As I had said when we met the first time, this is just another branch I'm opening. It'll be independent of other branches. You'll be the one handling all matters here in my absence. Shigeki thought for a bit and asked, why have I never heard of such an organization before? Also, what does the Phantom Haven Society do? Fujin answered, it's simple. The phantom in the name is to indicate our method of operation. We operate in absolute secrecy and stay elusive, rarely appearing in the light. Even when a member appears in the light, he or she shouldn't be mentioning the name of the organization. The same rules will apply here as well. This is why it is very unlikely for anyone to have heard of us. As for my goal, Fujin paused for a few seconds before continuing. The goal of Phantom Haven Society is to save the innocent and the weak from the evils of society. A good portion of the world's population suffers due to torment inflicted by bandits, rogue ninjas, greedy nobles, or by becoming targets of schemes of the leaders of various hidden villages. You, despite having decent strength and status, still fell prey to the schemes of an elder. The normal people who can't utilize their chakra have it far worse. They're entirely dependent on the whims of the strong. The Phantom Haven Society will work to get strong to be able to help such people. Shigeki was stunned. In such a cruel world, he never expected there to be someone with such noble goals. In fact, even he himself wasn't that noble and only wanted revenge. Though Shigeki couldn't see Fujin's face, he could sense how serious Fujin was through his voice. He thought, such a noble goal. I was lucky to be saved by him. Once I complete my revenge, I'll dedicate my life to this goal. to ensure that no one else goes through the same suffering as my family. I'm sure my daughter and wife would want that as well. Shigeki had several doubts about who Shurden was and what his goals were. On learning the truth and realizing Fujin's seriousness, he was heavily influenced by the idea of making the world a better place. Fujin observed his expression and sighed in relief while thinking, good. He bought it. While Fujin regularly played games with Hiruzen and at times with Shikaku and Danzo, this was the first time he tried it when something was at stake. He immediately became pleased after he tested what he learned from them. Shigeki said, I'll be honored to help you make that goal a reality. However, such goals will harm the benefits of several nobles and leaders. We could be targeted by major and minor villages. Though he was influenced, Shigeki understood how difficult the task was. Fujin nodded and said yes. That is why it is necessary to be elusive and act in secrecy. If the word of our activities spreads, others will ignore us at the start. However, once we begin intruding on anyone's benefits, we will be opposed heavily. Even with my strength, I can't bear the force of an entire ninja village. Even if we keep acting in secrecy, there is always a chance that details still get leaked. That is why every branch is independent of each other. If one branch messes up and attracts trouble, the others will be safe. I'll dissolve that branch and have them help other branches or create another secret force that will secretly aid other branches. Chapter 478, Phantom Will. Shigeki nodded. He agreed with the steps Fujin had taken. He asked, all right, what should I do right now? How will I manage this branch? Fujin said, though the goal of Phantom Haven Society is good, we can't do good just by wishing for it. Otherwise, this world would have long achieved peace. To help progress towards our goal, we need to do 3 things. They'll be your main activities. 1. We need to recruit more people. I can't stay here all the time, and you won't be able to handle everything by yourself. For starters, you'll be responsible for recruiting other ninjas like you. Ninjas who you trust, are good-natured, and will be willing to work with dedication towards such a goal. Of course, considering the risky nature of the job, you should only recruit ninjas who don't have anything to lose and don't have anyone dependent on them. Shigeki understood the reason behind Fujin's words. Once someone joins such a secret organization with such an outrageous goal, they will have a difficult time returning to live with their loved ones. Not to mention, they could be hunted down once their past is exposed. Even if they escape, their families will suffer. Fujin continued, once you have recruited a few capable ninjas, you can start operating. To start with, we will be focusing on 2 things. Our goal is to help unfortunate people who face calamities. But in order to help such people, we need to know that they are suffering and need to know that quickly enough. Otherwise, we won't be able to help them all. To do so, you will need to build an information network. The 3rd thing will apply when we get into action and rescue an affected village or community. We will help them resettle, either in the same place by eliminating the danger if we can, or in a nearby village if we can't, and they are willing to move. During such rescues, we will also recruit young kids who have the passion to join an organization like ours and the talent to become a ninja. Unlike the hidden villages, we will never send the kids to war. Instead, they will stay safe in this hideout until they are trained enough to be considered shunits. This will be your most important task. Though we are decently strong, there isn't much 2 people can do by themselves. In fact, even with help, we can't be sure if this goal will be achieved during our lifetime. We will need strong and passionate youngsters with the drive to see that our goal will be achieved even if we pass on. Fujin looked into Shigeki's eyes and asked in a serious tone, Kasai Shigeki, are you willing to take over this role? Shigeki replied respectfully, I am willing. Fujin nodded and said, good. He extended his right palm towards Shigeki. A seal appeared in his right hand. Fujin said, this is the Phantom Seal. Every member of the Phantom Haven Society will have this seal. This seal has several functions. For starters, it'll allow me to identify the members of our society. Secondly, this seal will prevent anyone from betraying us. If anyone tries to leak our secrets, then his or her body will be paralyzed. Even other Fuinjutsu grandmasters won't be able to help them. In addition, This seal also prevents anyone from controlling or reading the minds of our members. Show me your back and lift your shirt. I'll apply the seal to you. Shigeki followed his instructions and presented his back. He thought, as I guessed, he is a Fuinjutsu Grandmaster. He might even be one of the best ones, seeing how confident he is in this seal. Shigeki didn't suspect Fujin and accepted the seal. As a result, Fujin didn't face any obstruction and was able to place the seal properly. Fujin said, "One important aspect of this seal is that I can only place it on those who are willing to join us. Otherwise, I won't be able to place the seal. It will prevent the ones who are unwilling or forced due to any reason from being able to join us. In the future, when you recruit, you have to ensure that you don't force someone to join us. I won't accept anyone if they aren't willing. By accepting this seal, it shows that you believe in the phantom will." For the umpteenth time, Shigeki was surprised. The seal was far more advanced than any seal he had seen or heard of. However, he was also confused. He asked, "What is phantom will?" Fujin answered, "It's an illusionary will that we believe in." Shigeki was even more confused. He asked, "What do you mean by illusionary?" Fujin answered in a serious tone, "Who in this world doesn't want peace? Who doesn't wish that everyone prospers and no one suffers? If you randomly take 10 people, at least 9 will say that they want the world to be peaceful. Even among ninjas, the number will be the same. However, the world is still filled with non-stop conflict. Even during peacetime, the Umbu of major villages are engaging in secret wars. Several minor villages go to war frequently. The ordinary people suffer due to such wars. Even if there are no wars on the surface, they still have to suffer due to bandits, rogue ninjas, famines, illness, and in several other ways. This world has enough resources for everyone to be satisfied and to ensure that no one suffers. Yet people suffer. The phantom will is the will everyone has to bring peace to the world. However, since no one acts on it, I call it the phantom will. The Phantom Haven Society will follow the phantom will. Though we aren't strong enough to bring about world peace, we will do every little thing in our power to bring peace, even if it is temporary and restricted to a small area. In the future, if we gain sufficient strength, then we will focus on making the entire world a peaceful place." Fujin's words made Shigeki fall into deep thought. While he was always an upright and kind-hearted person, he hadn't ever gone out of his way to help the common people unless it was a mission. When he heard Fujin's goals, he was impressed that someone so strong could devote his life to such a noble cause. It was completely opposite of every higher-up he had ever seen. Hearing Fujin speak about the phantom will made him place Fujin at an even higher place in his heart. He had never heard about something like it. Though many villages had their own wills, starting from the famed will of fire propagated by the first Hokage, it was his first time hearing about a will that compassed every human. It was also the first time he felt so attached to a will. Memories resurfaced as he thought of his own experiences. He recalled how he observed the unfairness in the world several times. However, he never did anything to reduce it despite wanting to and having a few opportunities. He was also at the receiving end during the previous Great Ninja Wars when the Land of Rivers was completely at the mercy of Konoha and Suna ninjas. He felt helpless, but didn't have the strength to do anything about it. The ones who did have the strength were engaged in a deadly war instead of helping others. Within a few minutes, Shigeki had convinced himself and become the greatest follower of the Phantom Will. It was a strange situation where his belief in the Phantom Will was infinitely greater than the one who could be considered its founder. Shigeki looked at Fujin and asked, "Sure, Din, can you tell me how strong you are? Are you a grandmaster in Fuinjutsu? Also, what are your other specialties?" The sudden question surprised Fujin. He wondered, exactly what conclusion did he reach to suddenly ask me such a question? To maintain the flow and ensure that Shigeki stayed loyal to him, Fujin had no choice but to satisfy his query. For a moment, Fujin felt just like how Hiruzen feels while dealing with him. Chapter 479, Structure and Ranks. Fujin answered, "Yes, I'm a grandmaster in Fuinjutsu. It is why I dare to make a base in such a place. I don't specialize in anything else, but I do know a little bit of everything. I can use all 5 nature manipulations, samurai saber techniques, Jinjutsu, Taijutsu, medical ninjutsu, and sensing. Of course, they aren't comparable to my Fuinjutsu. Overall, I could be considered as a rank S ninja. When Fujin had thought about how to answer this question, he had expected Shigeki to be awed. However, the sudden change in Shigeki's attitude made his speculation incorrect. There was no awe on Shigeki's face. Instead, there was pride. Learning all 5 elements was an extremely rare feat. Very few ninjas could claim to have done that in history. And very few of them could claim to be grandmasters in Fuinjutsu. Not to mention, Fujin had mentioned that he had some expertise in nearly every other field. To have such a person as the leader was something to be proud of. Shigeki immediately felt much more confident in achieving the goals of the Phantom Haven Society. Fujin felt uncomfortable on seeing Shigeki's passionate stare. The hair on his body stood as he felt goosebumps from the gaze. He muttered to himself, if I ever decide to take off the mask, I need to disguise myself as an old man. Maybe I shouldn't have bluffed about the 5 elements. Though Fujin said he could use all 5 elements, his ability in the water element was extremely lousy. Fujin had only managed to learn some rank E and D jutsus, which were more or less useless in battle. In fact, his most effective way of using water in a fight was unleashing a large amount of water that he kept in a few storage seals and speeding it up with wind. Of course, he wasn't particularly concerned about it being exposed, as he never planned on fighting much with this identity. Ignoring Shigeki's passionate stare, Fujin was very satisfied with his reaction. He had to think extremely hard to come up with the philosophy of the Phantom Will. Though the goal of the Phantom Haven Society was something people would support and would want to be a part of, in Fujin's perspective, the Phantom Will was even more important. Looking at the history of the ninja world, there was no doubt that the most successful organizations were the major villages. Each of them had their own will and passed it on to the next generation who firmly believed in it. If Fujin wasn't a transmigrator and had directly been born in Konoha or didn't have the memories of his past life, he didn't doubt that he would have been a staunch believer in the will of fire too. By comparison, Akatsuki had terrifying power and a noble goal as well. However, they didn't have any such will to believe in. With none of their members believing in a common will, they lacked the same cohesiveness as a ninja village. Most of their members had their own goals. Even the loyalty of most members was questionable. Despite having so many top-tier ninjas, the fact that they didn't even bother trying to avenge a fallen comrade said a lot about the nature of their organization. For Fujin, the strength of his organization wasn't very important. Instead, he needed loyalty and diligence. As long as they created and maintained a good information network and provided real information to Fujin, he didn't care as to whether they actually did anything else. As a result, having a will that united everyone became very important for Fujin. Seeing Shigeki's reaction, Fujin became confident that the Phantom would be good enough to keep his organization united for a long time. He thought, I guess I need to be thankful to Hiruzen. Without his frequent attempts to influence me with the will of fire, I might not have been able to create this. Fujin took out a scroll and said, I'll explain to you the structure of the Phantom Haven Society. Of course, these are just the guidelines. If you want to make some changes to improve the efficiency, feel free to do so. Shigeki accepted the scroll and opened it as Fujin explained. While I'm the leader, I won't be here very frequently. In my absence, you will be handling all the activities here. Hence, your rank will be the second highest, that is, the vice leader. The lowest rank will be of the young kids you recruit. They will be the students and the future of the Phantom Haven Society. We won't be accepting anyone who can't become a ninja here, so there won't be any ordinary civilians here. The students will be trained until they can be considered as a chunin in minor villages. Shigeki interrupted Fujin and asked in confusion, Chunins? Fujin nodded and explained, yes, chunins. In a fight between ninjas, the fatality of genins is very high. I don't want to see young kids meeting their death meaninglessly. Shigeki's respect for Fujin increased once again. Fujin continued, unlike the hidden villages, the academy here will continue training kids until the age of 15. If they reach the chunin level earlier, they'll be allowed to graduate early. If they fail to reach that rank, Then they can be developed as spies or informants, or they can be given non-combative miscellaneous roles within this base depending on their talents. If their strength improves in the future, they can be promoted to field agents. As for the ones who manage to pass, they will become field agents immediately and can participate in our rescue missions. They will likely make the bulk of our forces. They will be divided into smaller teams and be led by captains. A captain will have to be as strong as an elite chunin or a special jounin from the major villages. Your strength when we met the first time was probably at this level. If someone manages to become strong enough to be considered as a jounin in major villages, they'll be promoted to the commander rank. They will be the ones commanding any operation. Every promotion to this rank will have to be approved by me. Apart from these ranks, I'll also label a few members as special elites. This will be for members who develop one skill to an extreme, like say becoming Grandmaster in Fuinjutsu, or becoming one of the best medical ninjas, or developing a Kekkei Genkai beyond a certain limit, and so on. Of course, if anyone manages to reach the elite jounin level, they'll also be included here. We will decide their duties when we have anyone at this rank. Shigeki took a couple of minutes to digest all the information. While he was in thought, Fujin added, "Of course, this will only work properly once we have sufficient members at each rank. For the time being, you'll need to make do with what you have. You'll have to command the missions yourself and appoint others depending on their skills and your needs." Shigeki nodded. It was a tough task. Fujin was asking a lot. Fortunately, Shigeki was willing to make the efforts needed to make the goal of the Phantom Haven Society a reality. He said, "If a day comes when we have thousands of field agents, hundreds of captains, dozens of commanders, and several special elites, we might be able to make this dream a reality." Fujin nodded. If the Phantom Haven Society reached such a level, then it might truly become a reality. Unfortunately, the chances of that happening before the Fourth Great Ninja War started were more or less nil. Despite having good guidance in the academy and an amazing sensei after graduation, Fujin still needed almost 6 years to reach the jounin level. Though he managed to reach the level of elite jounin soon after, it would have taken a lot longer if Hiruzen hadn't taught him the wind vacuum technique as a reward for beating the record in the second stage of the Chunin exams. Similarly, to become a rank S ninja, Fujin was extremely overdependent on using shadow clones to become a Fuinjutsu Grandmaster and developing a few extremely stealthy seals. Without either of those factors, Fujin's route to becoming a rank S would have been much more difficult and time-consuming. That is why Fujin wasn't counting on any young kid the organization recruited to have the ability to reach rank S in the next 5-6 years. Even reaching the elite jounin level would be only possible if Fujin or Shigeki managed to directly recruit a promising young genin or chunin. The only possible exceptions would be if Fujin managed to recruit someone who was already a rank S ninja or an elite jounin. Unfortunately, the chances of someone that strong joining and willingly accepting the Phantom Seal were extremely low. Shigeki followed up by asking several questions that were important for running the base successfully. Fujin had already thought of all the questions and patiently answered every question properly. Chapter 480, Two Choices. At one point, Shigeki asked, "What if one of our members wants to quit and return to a normal life?" Fujin answered, "Then we let them go. As I said, though the Phantom will exist in everyone, it is unrealistic to expect everyone to act on it. Of course, we won't be removing the Phantom Seal, so there won't be any danger of them leaking sensitive information. If they change their mind in the future, they can rejoin. They could also recommend others to join us. Not to mention, any former member will help us with gathering information. Whether they do it actively or passively will be their choice. So, they will still help us reach our goal faster. Besides, with them out there, they can ensure that the crimes against the weak are reduced. At the very least, no normal bandit group will be able to harm the village they are staying in." Shigeki nodded. Though it could reduce their fighting power temporarily, it'll make their unity stronger if they aren't forced to serve. Shigeki continued asking more questions until he covered every aspect. Once he was done, Fujin asked, "Do you have anyone in mind that you would like to recruit?" Shigeki nodded and answered yes. "I thought of them when you said that I would have to recruit. I know 13 former ninjas from Tanagakure who were falsely accused at different times. They became rogue ninjas, and I was even sent to hunt a few of them down. But after learning the truth, I let them off and reported that those missions had failed. All of them became rogue ninjas. Some lived while hiding from the official ninjas, while some became bounty hunters. 5 of them stayed together in a group, and 4 more stayed together forming another group. The remaining 4 moved alone. Unfortunately, it has been 3 years since I heard about them, so I'm not sure if I'll be able to find them, or even if they are still alive and well. Fujin nodded and said, "All right, that'll be a start. How long will it take you to find them?" Shigeki answered, "I can't say for sure. If I'm lucky, then in 3 days. If not, then it might take a month and I still might not track all of them down." Fujin thought for a bit and instructed, "All right, you'll set out to find them. Return here in 10 days, time irrespective of how many you find. I'll build the basic structure of the base until teach." He suddenly paused and began thinking. Shigeki wanted to ask something, but stopped since Fujin was busy thinking. After a minute, Fujin looked at Shigeki and said, "Actually, I'll build the main base here and a mini base halfway into this valley. Only the members I have applied the seal and will be allowed in the main base. The rest will have to stay in the mini base until I visit to apply the seals. This will reduce the risk of any spy leaking information about our main base." Also, Fujin grabbed a storage scroll and opened it. From one of the seals, he summoned a few hundred tags with some sort of seal on them. Fujin handed them to Shigeki and said, "Though my phantom seal is very safe, accidents could always happen. If someone accidentally triggers the seal and it paralyzes them, you can use these tags to undo the paralysis. The phantom seal will reform itself, so don't worry about someone trying to use this to get rid of the seal. When you try to recruit those guys, be careful what you speak. You can't leak the secrets of Phantom Haven Society until the phantom seal is applied to them." Shigeki nodded and said, "Yes, I figured that out. And thank you. This will make my job easier." He accepted all the tags. Fujin instructed, "Now get going. I'll send a mud clone with you to inform you of the location of the mini base." Fujin was about to create a clone when Shigeki said, "Actually, I wanted to ask something." Fujin stopped and said, "Ask." Shigeki said, "You had promised to help me get revenge. Can I know when we can do so?" Though Shigeki was impressed by the Phantom Haven Society, he never forgot the fate of his family. It had tormented him for years. Fujin had thought of this matter as well. Initially, he wanted to have Shigeki give shape to the organization and only then help him. After all, if Shigeki lost his will after getting revenge, Fujin would suffer a needless loss. However, Fujin changed his mind after seeing how much he was influenced by the Phantom Will. Fujin said, "I'll give you 2 choices. The first one is that we'll go now and eliminate the ones who caused injustice to your family. However, since it will be just the 2 of us, the entire operation will be done silently. I'll give you an opportunity to assassinate them. Or you can knock them out, take them away from Tanagakure, and torture them for a few hours before killing them. Regardless, no proof will be left behind. No one will know that this was done by you or that those scums were finally served justice. The second choice is that you wait a few years and form a formidable force in this base. You can then lead them openly to help get your revenge. Everyone will know that justice was served. Everyone will know that it was you who did it. In the future, the higher-ups will think 10 times before subjecting anyone else to such a fate. The choice is yours." Fujin stayed quiet after speaking. It was quite easy to deduce which path he wanted Shigeki to take. Shigeki fell into deep thought. He spent nearly 5 minutes thinking before he answered, "When I work towards the goal of Phantom Haven Society, I don't want to be distracted by anything else. Nor do I want to feel resentful that the killers of my family are still alive. I choose the first option. I don't want any glory, nor do I want to use the Phantom Haven Society to fulfill my goals. I just want to deliver justice for my family. I hope you can help me kidnap them and give me a few hours alone with them. Also, if I am able to kill them first, it'll be very helpful in recruiting others to join us, as most of them hate the higher UPS in the village. In addition, I also want to gather some information about the village. If more were subjected to a similar treatment as me, I might be able to recruit them as well if they are still alive." Fujin was surprised by the answer. He thought, Weird. After getting entranced by the phantom will, I expected him to choose the second option. I guess I'm not that good at reading people yet. Oh well, it shouldn't matter much. With this out of the way, he'll focus entirely on making this base stronger. Fujin nodded and said, "All right, let's go." The two left immediately. En route, Fujin showed him where the mini base would be created. It was around 6 kilometers from the main base, and still very well hidden from outside the valley, making it extremely unlikely for anyone to stumble upon it. In one of the palaces in Tanagakure, a loud shriek could be heard in the middle of the night. 2 medical ninjas were around a man in his 20s, while an older man was standing behind them. He frowned and asked, "How long would it take you to heal my son's injuries?" "It has been over 2.5 years now." Anger could be heard in his voice. However, the old man was still restraining himself. One of the medical ninjas sighed and answered, "We already told you, Kanji-sama. There isn't much we can do." Itsuki's chakra network was extremely damaged when he was attacked. Even though we have repaired his chakra network as much as we could, it is still very fragile. Every time he uses his chakra, he'll feel an extremely high amount of pain. Suddenly, Itsuki screamed once again. He could hear everything the medical ninja said. However, it wasn't his chakra network or the pain that caused him the most sorrow. It was what was missing between his legs. He shouted angrily, "Father, I want to see that motherfucker Shigeki and mutilate him too." Kanji sighed, seeing his son's situation. As time passed, his mental state continuously became worse. He said, "Shigeki is long dead, Itsuki. If he was alive, he would have tried to get his revenge long back." Kanji had sent 5 ninjas to kill an injured Shigeki. He had expected it to go without any accident. Unfortunately, Fujin had ruined his plans. He never heard about those 5 ninjas again. For some time, he was afraid that Shigeki had killed them. However, as time passed, he believed that Shigeki died as well. He speculated that he did a suicide attack that killed all 6 of them. Of course, that didn't do much to reduce the hatred he felt for Shigeki. Just as the father-son duo were cursing Shigeki, a voice was heard. "Oh, you wanted to see me? Good. I've been wanting to see the two of you for every second since that accursed day." Suddenly, everyone in the room turned around and looked in the direction of the voice. To their surprise, Shigeki stood there, along with a masked man. Itsuki jumped out of his bed while screaming, "Bastard! I'll kill you!" Luckily for him, the medical ninjas held him back. Meanwhile, Kanji asked in surprise, "How did you enter here undetected?"